Hey there, story lovers. This is Super Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Veela Queen and Goblin Nation jointly scanned Harry at age 10 after detecting 28 illegal compulsions and dark bindings? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Wrongness in the Ley Line. The ley line ran beneath Hampshire like a vein of old light, deep and steady and older than any building that had ever stood above it. Maeve Iarsolane walked it the way she walked everything, with absolute attention and very little patience for anything that wasted her time. It was a survey. Routine. The kind of thing she delegated to her junior court mages every other season, but this particular ley line fed directly into 3 Veela nesting territories in the south of England, and after last winter's flux anomalies, she had decided to handle it herself. She had a talent for detecting contamination that none of her court mages had yet developed, a sensitivity in her own magic that felt less like a skill and more like an old wound that had never fully healed. She could feel wrongness the way some people feel cold air through a cracked window. She felt it now. She stopped walking. The survey team behind her, for court mages in pale silver traveling robes, stopped too, watching her with the kind of careful attention people give to someone who has never once been wrong about something like this. Maeve stood very still in the middle of a Surrey field with her eyes closed and her head tilted slightly, the way she always looked when she was listening to something no one else could hear. The ley line hummed beneath her feet, clean and strong for the most part, but there, threading through it like a hair-thin crack through glass, was something that made her teeth ache. It wasn't contamination from the line itself. She had felt that before, old hexes left in the soil, industrial magic seeping down from poorly warded factories, the occasional desperate summoning ritual someone had tried and regretted. This was different. This was coming down into the line from somewhere above. Something was bleeding dark magic into the ley line from the surface, and it had been doing it for years. She could tell by the depth of the stain, the way it had settled into the line's natural rhythm like sediment at the bottom of a river. She opened her eyes. "Pack up," she said. "We're not doing the rest of the survey today." Her senior court mage, a woman named Sable with quick dark eyes and the good sense never to argue with the queen, stepped forward. "Do you need us to? I need you to go home." Maeve was already pulling her tracking focus from the inside pocket of her coat, a small disc of polished orichalcum that she had carved herself, years ago, during a period of her life she didn't particularly enjoy thinking about. She held it over the ground and let it orient. "I'll find you when I'm done." Sable looked at the focus. Looked at Maeve's face. Made a sound that was not quite agreement but was definitely not argument, and began herding the junior mages back toward the apparition point. Maeve didn't watch them go. She was already following the thread. It took her 40 minutes of walking through increasingly unremarkable Surrey suburbia before the focus pulled her to a stop outside a house on a street called Privet Drive. She stood on the pavement and looked at it for a long moment. Number 4. Neat garden. Clean windows. A car in the drive that was slightly too large and slightly too polished, the way cars look when the person who owns them has decided that a car is something you use to tell people who you are. Window boxes. A doormat that said welcome in letters that, combined with the rest of the house's aggressive normality, felt faintly threatening. The dark magic was coming from inside. Not from the house itself, not cursed objects or hexed furniture. From a person. The ley line was just close enough to the surface here that the magic bleeding off whoever was inside had found its way down into it, and that meant whoever was inside was radiating dark magic at a constant, sustained rate. Not casting it. Not using it deliberately. Just, leaking it, the way a wound leaks. Maeve stood on the pavement and thought very carefully. Then she took out her mirror and called Ragnarok. The Goblin High Chief did not appreciate being called without warning. He had made this clear to her on approximately 12 separate occasions over the past 20 years, and she had acknowledged this information approximately 0 times, because she found that Ragnarok's irritation was generally proportional to how interesting the thing she was calling about turned out to be, and he had never once, in 20 years, actually refused to answer. He didn't refuse now. His face appeared in the silver surface of the mirror with the expression of someone who has been interrupted in the middle of something important and has decided to be professionally annoyed about it. Ir Solane. Ragnak. She didn't waste time. I'm standing outside a house in Surrey. There's a human child inside, young, I think, based on the feel of the magic, and the dark contamination coming off them has been staining a major ley line for what feels like several years. I need you to come and tell me if what I'm detecting matches your records. A short silence. My records. Your accounts. Your vaults. You track every significant magical signature in Britain. If this child has a vault, you'll know who they are. Another silence, longer this time. Ragnak's expression had shifted from professionally annoyed to something harder to read. You're describing active dark magic bleeding from a child. Yes. And you want me to cross-reference vault signatures. That's what I said. Ir Solane. His voice had gone very flat. Do you have any idea whose territory you're standing in? That street, Privet Drive in Little Whinging, that address is flagged in our system. Maeve felt something cool and attentive move through her. Flagged how? There are ministry enchantments on that property going back 9 years. Blood wards. And a rather emphatic directive from the chief warlock of the Wisengamot that Gringotts is not to conduct any vault activity for the account registered to that address without his express personal authorization. The cool attentive feeling sharpened into something with edges. Which chief warlock? Dumbledore. She looked at the house. The window boxes. The welcome mat. I see, she said, in a tone that meant the opposite. How quickly can you be at Gringotts? Ragnak asked. 20 minutes. I'll meet you at the private entrance. He paused. Bring your scan records. Everything the focus picked up. Don't touch the child yet. Obviously, she said, and closed the mirror. Gringotts at night, after the public counters had closed and the tourist flow had dried up and the building had settled back into what it actually was, which was a fortress, was a completely different place from Gringotts during the day. The marble and gold of the public hall gave way quickly, once you were past the private entrance, to stone corridors that had not been designed with human comfort in mind. The ceilings were too low for humans but not for goblins, the lighting was a deep amber that was perfectly calibrated for goblin eyes, and the air smelled of old metal and older magic. Maeve had been through this entrance enough times over the past 2 decades that she moved through it without hesitating, ducking the low archways without breaking stride. Ragnak met her at the third junction, a small, iron-haired figure in dark clothing who moved with the kind of economy that came from spending a very long life never wasting emotion. He looked at her. She looked at him. Show me, he said. She showed him the scan data. The orichalcum focus held the readings like a recording, she pressed her thumb to it and the data bloomed in the air between them, visible to both their forms of magical sight, a 3-dimensional map of the magic she had detected, layered and color-coded by type and age. Ragnak was quiet for a very long time. Walk with me, he said finally, and led her down 2 more corridors and into a small room that held nothing but a table, 2 chairs, and a records vault set into the far wall. He pressed his palm to the vault door and it opened without a sound. He pulled a ledger. Then another. His fingers moved through the pages with the practiced efficiency of someone who had maintained these records personally for longer than some countries had existed. He found what he was looking for and set the ledger open on the table. Maeve looked at the name. Then at Ragnak's face. Harry James Potter, she said. He's been a Gringotts account holder since birth, Ragnak said. Both the Potter and Black estates. The Black account has been interfered with, let's say. But the Potter account is active. The signature matches. He pointed at the scanned data she'd brought. Everything you detected is coming from the Potter heir. What am I looking at, exactly? In terms of the magic itself? Ragnak pulled the second ledger. We conduct passive magical signature monitoring on all accounts above a certain tier. Standard practice, we watch for unauthorized access, attempted theft, that sort of thing. For a child, we also watch the signature for development patterns. Normal magical growth looks, he sketched something in the air, a smooth upward arc, like this. What the Potter account shows, he showed her the corresponding section. The line on the chart looked like something had sat on it. Flat. Actively suppressed. And threaded through it, like wires through a wall, were signatures that were not Harry Potter's at all. How many? Maeve asked, though she had already started counting. Our last audit found 23. He turned another page. But that audit was 18 months ago. Based on your current scan data, 28, she said. 28, he confirmed. He closed the ledger with a quiet, deliberate sound. Compulsions. Loyalty bindings. Obedience frameworks. A squib weaving, someone tried to cut off his access to magic entirely, and it didn't take properly, which is why the contamination is bleeding instead of sitting quietly. A block on his magical inheritance. 2 blocks on his creature inheritance, Maeve's voice was very precise. He has at least one active inheritance that we've never been able to fully identify through the suppression. The Potter line goes back far enough that there are, Ragnarok paused, choosing words carefully, layers. The inheritance block is one of the oldest bindings. It was placed first, before he was even a year old. Maeve was quiet for a moment. The room felt very still around them. Someone did this to an infant, she said. Several someones. The signatures don't all match. Some are old, Order of Merlin level practitioners. Some are newer. Cruder. More desperate. Ragnarok looked at her steadily. The oldest and most sophisticated ones match a signature we know. Dumbledore. Yes. She stood up. Sat back down. This was unusual for her. Maeve Iarsolane was not someone who had difficulty staying still, and Ragnarok watched it without comment. The Ministry directive on the property, she said. The one blocking Gringotts' access. Has been in place for 9 years. Since the night the boy was left there. Ragnarok's expression was doing something complicated. He was old enough that his face had stopped betraying much, but there was something in the set of his jaw that she recognized as fury at rest, controlled, not gone. We honored it because we had no grounds to challenge it. The account was active, the heir was officially under ministry-designated guardianship, and challenging the chief warlock of the Wisengamot over a vault access directive was, not something we could do without significant justification. You have 28 illegal magical modifications on a child as justification. We have 28 illegal magical modifications on a child that we detected tonight, Ragnarok said, which means officially, as of tonight, we have grounds. Our previous audits flagged anomalies. We noted them. We were told by the ministry liaison that the Potter heir's unusual magical signature was a result of, he consulted the ledger again, briefly, protective war-era enchantments placed for the child's safety by the late Lily Potter. The silence that followed that sentence was a different quality from the silences before it. And you believe that? Maeve asked. We had no countervailing evidence at the time. Ragnarok met her eyes. We do now. She drummed 2 fingers on the table, once, twice, then stopped. What does your treaty with the ministry say about illegal magical modifications on a minor account holder? That Gringotts has the right and responsibility to perform a comprehensive scan and provide remedy, Ragnarok said. Without ministry authorization required. The treaty predates the current ministry structure by 400 years. Dumbledore cannot block it. And the Veela nation's compact with the crown? She was already working through it. We have right of access to any magical being under threat of dark magic within British borders. A child with 28 illegal compulsions and a contaminated leyline signature qualifies under the compact's definition of under threat. Yes. So we go tonight. Ragnarok looked at her for a moment. Then he almost smiled, Not a warm expression, exactly, but something that meant she had arrived at the same place he had been sitting for the last hour. "I had the retrieval paperwork started before you arrived," he said. They went at 3 in the morning, because 3 in the morning was when the Desleys' house was fully dark and fully quiet, and because it gave them the best chance of getting the boy out before anyone in the neighborhood noticed anything unusual. Maeve brought 2 of her senior Veela guard, Ash and Cinder, both of whom had the kind of faces that suggested they had broken more things than most people owned, and Ragnarok brought his senior account manager, a sharp-eyed goblin named Griphook who had been handling the Potter accounts for years and who carried the retrieval documentation in a case that he held with both hands and treated like something precious. Maeve lifted the ministry's detection wards as they approached the house. They weren't designed to stop a Veela queen, they were designed to stop underage magic from being detected, and she walked through them like they were cobwebs. The blood wards were more interesting. They recognized her, in the way old magic recognizes old magic, and they let her through with something that felt almost like relief, which was strange enough that she filed it away to think about later. Ragnarok picked the lock on the front door with 2 seconds and a tool he pulled from his belt, and they were inside. The house smelled of cooking and cleaning products, and underneath both of those, almost hidden, the faint metallic tang of ongoing dark magic. Maeve's focus pulsed in her pocket. She didn't need it. She could feel him, up the stairs, second door, the magic coming off him in slow, constrained waves like light through shuttered windows. She went up alone. Ragnarok stayed downstairs with Griphook, both of them standing in the hallway with their arms folded, looking at the family photographs on the wall with expressions that could charitably be described as unimpressed. The door to the smallest bedroom was the second on the right, and it had a lock on the outside. Maeve looked at that lock for 3 full seconds. Then she opened it. The room was tiny. It had a camp bed, a broken desk that had been inexpertly repaired, a single small window, and a child asleep in it who was so small that for a moment she thought she had the wrong room. Then she looked properly, and the wrongness she had felt in the ley line hit her full in the chest like a physical blow, close up, without the distance of a survey. It was unmistakable. The magic woven around this boy was thick and dark and deliberate and wrong in ways that made her hands want to move towards something, though there was nothing here to fight. He was 10 years old. Too thin, in a way that wasn't growing boy thin but the other kind. A scar on his forehead that radiated its own particular darkness, carefully contained within the broader binding structure. Dark hair going in every direction. Glasses on the desk beside him, one arm held together with tape. He woke up when she stepped into the room, not startled, not crying out, just went from asleep to alert with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that loud responses to unexpected things caused problems. He sat up. He looked at her. His hand went toward his glasses and then stopped when he realized she was not one of the people he expected to find waking him at 3 in the morning. His eyes, she noticed, were extraordinarily green. Even in the near dark. "Hello," he said, carefully. "Hello," she said. "My name is Maeve. I'm not going to hurt you. I need you to come with me." He looked at her, actually looked, with an attention that was unusual in a 10-year-old and spoke to a child who had spent a long time having to read rooms very quickly. She was tall, she was silver-haired, the particular silver that was not gray but purely, almost luminously silver, and she was standing in his doorway at 3 in the morning in a coat that had small runes embroidered along the hem and carrying herself like someone who had never in her life worried about whether she had the right to be wherever she was. "Are you from the government?" he asked. "No." "Are you from the school?" "No." He considered this. "Are you going to bring me back?" The question was asked with the same careful neutrality he'd been using since she woke him, but there was something underneath it, not fear, exactly. More like a person bracing for an answer they already expect. "No," she said. He looked at her for another moment. Then he reached over and put on his glasses. "Give me a second," he said, and started pulling things out from under the bed, a small bag, already packed. Maeve stood in the doorway and watched him pack with the neat efficiency of someone who had done it before, or had been ready to do it for a while, and felt something settle in her chest that was quiet and cold and very close to fury. He was packed in under 2 minutes. He stood up, bag on his shoulder, and looked at her. "Okay," he said. She stepped aside and let him out into the hallway. He stopped when he saw the stairs, not because of Ragnak and Grip Hook at the bottom, but because of what he clearly expected to happen, standing there for a moment with his shoulders up around his ears. "They're with me," Maeve said quietly. He looked down at Ragnak. Ragnak looked up at him. The goblin had an expression that most people found alarming, which was just what his face looked like when he was paying close attention. Harry Potter came down the stairs and offered his hand. Ragnak shook it. His expression shifted by approximately 2 millimeters, which was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "Harry Potter," Ragnak said. "I am Ragnak, High Chief of the Goblin Nation. You have accounts with us." "I have accounts," Harry said. "Several. We will discuss them." He turned toward the door. "Come." Harry followed him, and Maeve followed Harry, and they walked out of number 4 Privet Drive into the 3 o'clock dark, and neither of the guards who were waiting on the pavement was surprised by this, and the house behind them was quiet. Harry stopped on the pavement and looked back at the house for a moment. Maeve watched him, waiting to see what he needed, whether he needed to be reassured, whether he needed time, whether there was something there he was reluctant to leave. He turned back around. "So," he said. "Where are we going?" "My court, first," Maeve said. "Then Gringotts." "Why your court first?" "Because," she said, "we need to talk to you before we do anything else, and the Veela court is currently the safest place in Britain for that conversation." He nodded, processing this. "What do we need to talk about?" Maeve glanced at Ragnak. Ragnak was looking at the boy with that same flat, attentive expression. "What do you know," Maeve said, choosing her words with care, "about the magic you can feel?" Harry blinked. "What do you mean? Can you feel it? The magic around you?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, "Yeah. I can. I've always been able to." He sounded like he was admitting something he'd been told he was wrong about. "My aunt says I imagine it." "Your aunt," Maeve said, "is wrong." Something in his face did something complicated at that, too many things at once for her to catalogue cleanly, and then he nodded, like that was information he was going to hold on to. "Okay," he said. "Your court, then." Ash stepped forward. "We'll need to side along apparate. Hold my arm." Harry looked at Ash, who was about 6 feet tall with silver-braided hair and the general impression of a woman who had once caught an arrow between 2 fingers just to see if she could. Then he looked at Maeve. "She won't drop me?" he asked. "She has never dropped anyone," Maeve said. "First time for everything," Harry said, and then, to Ash, as he took her arm, "No offense." Ash looked down at him. Something shifted in her expression that was not quite a smile but was in that direction. "None taken, little lord," she said, and then the world folded. The Veela court was in the New Forest, and it was not what Harry had been expecting, though Maeve suspected he hadn't had time to form expectations. It occupied a portion of the forest that had been quietly outside Muggle awareness for 3 centuries, and it did not look like a castle or a palace or any of the things a child might expect when you said court. It looked like the forest, but more so, taller, quieter, the air holding a kind of attention that wasn't threatening but wasn't neutral either. The buildings, if you could call them that, which was debatable, were grown rather than built, shaped from living wood and old stone, lit with a warm gold light that came from everywhere and nowhere specific. Harry stood in the courtyard and looked around with the careful attention he'd been using all evening. "It's different," he said. "Different how?" Maeve asked. "The magic here." He tilted his head slightly, the way she had tilted hers over the ley line earlier. "It doesn't feel wrong. Everything's felt wrong for as long as I can remember. This doesn't." Ragnak was watching the boy from 2 steps behind, and Maeve didn't look at him but she could feel his attention sharpen. "Come inside," she said. "Are you hungry?" He shrugged in a way that meant yes but had been trained not to say so. "Come inside," she said again, and let him in, and had food put in front of him before she let anyone say another word to him, and watched him try not to eat too fast and fail, and kept her face neutral and pleasant while something inside her that was very old and very precise filed away everything it was seeing for later use. They sat in a small room off the main hall, just the three of them, Harry with a plate in front of him and Ragnarok on a chair that had been found at the last minute because goblins generally didn't sit in chairs and the court hadn't thought to provide one, and Maeve across the table. "We're going to tell you some things," Maeve said. "Some of them are going to be difficult to hear. I'd like you to eat first." Harry looked up from his plate. "How difficult?" "On a scale of 1 to 10. 8. He put his fork down. "Tell me now." She almost smiled. "Eat while I talk, then." He picked his fork back up. "We detected you tonight through a ley line survey," Maeve said. "There is dark magic bleeding off of you and into the Hampshire ley system. Not because of anything you've done. Because of what has been done to you." He ate. He listened. "Ragnarok's team has been tracking anomalies in your magical signature since you were old enough to register one. Tonight we were able to do a detailed external scan using my focus." She paused. "Harry, there are 28 separate illegal magical constructs woven into your magic. Compulsions. Bindings. Blocks. Most of them have been there since before you could walk." The fork slowed. Stopped. He set it down. "Someone bound my magic," he said. "Not a question." "Several someones." "Yes." "Who?" Ragnarok answered that one. "Some of the signatures are unknown. Some are identifiable. The most sophisticated and the oldest ones belong to Albus Dumbledore." Harry was very still. He had the same quality of stillness she'd noticed when he first woke. Not frozen, just contained, everything happening on the inside instead of the outside. He was processing fast. She could see it in the slight movement of his eyes, the way his jaw had set. "He's the one who put me with the Dursleys," Harry said. "Yes. And he bound my magic. The most significant bindings, yes. Others were added over the years by different hands." Another silence. "Then, can you take them off?" "That's why you're here," Ragnarok said. "The Goblin healing team and Maeve's court healers together, yes. We can remove them. All of them. It will take time and it will not be comfortable." Harry looked at Maeve. "What happens when they come off?" "The bindings." This was the question she had been deciding how to answer since she stood in his doorway. She decided on the truth. "We don't know exactly," she said. "Because we don't fully know what's underneath them. Your natural magical signature is," she paused. "Considerable, Harry. The bindings are what's making the dark magic bleed. They weren't designed for magic as strong as yours. They're cracking." He looked down at the table for a moment. Then back up. 28, he said. "Yes. And the one who put most of them there is the most famous and trusted wizard in Britain." "Yes. And you too," he looked between her and Ragnarok. "You came and got me in the middle of the night. Why? What do you get out of this?" It was a fair question and a sharp one and she respected it. "The ley lines are Veela territory. Contamination of them is a treaty violation and a direct threat to my people. That gives me legal standing to act." She held his eyes. "That's the official reason. And the unofficial one?" "Someone put 28 illegal bindings on a child," Maeve said simply. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then at Ragnarok. "I have accounts at Gringotts," he said. "Several," Ragnarok said. "Accounts that were being blocked." "Yes. By Dumbledore." "By a ministry directive initiated by Dumbledore," Ragnarok said, with the careful precision of someone who had spent a long career in the exact meaning of words. which we are now legally empowered to override, due to tonight's scan results. Harry nodded slowly. He looked at his food. He picked up his fork again, and Maeve thought that was a very good sign, not shutting down, not breaking down, just picking up his fork and continuing to eat while he thought. She had known grown men who would have handled that less well. Okay, he said. So what happens next? Tonight, you sleep, Maeve said. We have a room prepared. Tomorrow we begin the removal process. It will take several days and you'll need rest between sessions. And then? And then, Ragnarok said, we find out what you actually are. Harry looked at him. Something shifted in his expression, not fear, and not quite excitement. Something more complicated than either. You don't know. We have theories, Ragnarok said. The bindings are too thick to see through clearly. But the inheritance block alone, he paused, choosing his words. There are things in the Potter and Black bloodlines that have not been active in generations. We suspect, based on the power signature we can detect even through the suppression, that when those bindings come off, you are going to be something the wizarding world has not seen in a very long time. Something good? Harry asked. Ragnarok almost smiled. Something true. Harry Potter ate the rest of his food, and Ash showed him to a room that was warm and had a real bed and no lock on the outside of the door, and he slept for 14 hours straight. Maeve and Ragnarok sat in the small room after he'd gone, the plates cleared away, and they were quiet for a while in the way that two people are quiet when they've done something that can't be undone and are deciding whether they would have done it differently. Dumbledore will notice he's gone by morning, Ragnarok said. The blood wards will register the absence. Yes, Maeve said. He'll move fast. He'll have to. She looked at the table. How fast can you prepare the full inheritance scan at Gringotts? Give me 2 days after the unbinding process completes. The unbinding will take 3 days minimum. So 5 days total. She thought. Can we keep this contained for 5 days? Can we keep the removal of the boy who lived from his ministry-designated home hidden from Albus Dumbledore for 5 days? Ragnarok's tone was dry. No. But we can make it difficult and legally complicated enough that he can't move against us directly in that time. What do you need from me? Formally invoke the Veela Compact. On record. Tonight, if possible. Maeve nodded. She had already drafted the invocation in her head during the walk back from Privet Drive. Done. What else? I'll flag the Potter accounts as under active Gringotts remediation. Under the 400-year treaty, that gives us sovereign jurisdiction over the account holder until the process is complete. He looked at her steadily. No one, including the Ministry, including the Wisengamot, including Albus Dumbledore, can legally compel us to release him once that flag is active. How long can you maintain it? As long as the remediation is genuinely ongoing. A pause. And there is quite a lot to remediate. Something that might have been a smile crossed Maeve's face. Good, she said. Do it. Ragnarok stood, collecting his documents. He paused at the door. He shook my hand, he said. Without hesitation. I know. Most children his age are frightened of goblins. He's not easily frightened, Maeve said. Or if he is, he doesn't let it make his decisions for him. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. No, he said. He doesn't. He looked at the door the boy had gone through. Get the unbinding team ready. I want the best people you have. Already called for, she said. Ragnarok left. Maeve sat alone in the quiet room for a long time, listening to the forest, and in the ley line beneath it. Already, even this far from Surrey, she thought she could feel the faintest easing in the contamination. Like a held breath, beginning to release. She would find out soon enough. Chapter 2, 28. The unbinding room was in the deepest part of the Veela court, where the oldest trees grew so close together their roots had fused underground into something that was less a forest floor and more a single continuous living thing. The room itself was circular, walled in pale stone that the trees had grown around over centuries, the ceiling open to a shaft of sky that in the early morning held the particular clear blue of a day that hadn't decided what it was going to be yet. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at it for a moment. "It looks like an operating theater," he said. "It functions like one," Maeve said, from behind him. "The stone is a conductor. It'll help move the released magic out safely instead of letting it discharge into you all at once." All at once sounds bad. All at once would be very bad, yes. He walked in. The room had a low stone platform in the center, not a table, more like a raised floor, a circle within the circle, and around the edge of the room stood 8 healers in white, 4 Veela court healers and 4 goblins in the adapted versions of their formal attire, small and precise and carrying cases of instruments that Harry had been told not to worry about and had immediately looked at very carefully. Ragnak was by the far wall with Griphook, both of them with documents and a portable version of the scanning apparatus they used at Gringotts. Maeve's head healer, a tall woman named Lyra with white-streaked dark hair and an expression of permanent focused calm, was standing at the platform's edge consulting something written in silver ink that moved as she read it. Harry walked to the center of the room and sat down on the platform, cross-legged, because there was no furniture and cross-legged seemed like the right default. Lyra looked at him. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Fine," Harry said. "We'll need more than fine," she said, not unkindly. "We're going to be working in your magic today. That means any discomfort, any nausea, anything that feels like it's going wrong rather than just difficult, you tell us immediately." "Okay. And if at any point you want us to stop, I won't want you to stop," Harry said. Lyra looked at him. He looked back. She nodded. "We start with the outermost layer," she said. "The compulsions are structured in a web, they're not independent, they reference each other. We can't just pull one out without mapping how it connects to the others, or we risk the whole structure collapsing inward." "What happens if it collapses inward?" "Nothing pleasant." She paused. "It won't. That's what the 8 of us are for." Harry nodded. "What do I need to do?" "Stay still. Try to stay calm. If you feel your magic trying to respond to what we're doing, and you will feel it, let it. Don't fight it and don't push it. Just let it move where it wants to move." He glanced at Maeve, who had stationed herself at the edge of the platform, not inside the working circle, but close enough that he could see her face. She gave him a look that he was already learning to read, which was the one that meant this will be hard and you can handle it. He faced forward. Lyra placed her hands approximately 6 inches from his temples and began. The first thing Harry felt was warmth, which was unexpected. He'd been braced for pain, or cold, or that particular magic-adjacent feeling he'd been ignoring for years that was a little like pressure and a little like sound. The warmth started at his temples and moved inward, and he understood after a moment that it was the healer's combined magic, moving carefully through the outer structure of his own. Like fingers reading a text in the dark. Then it found the first binding. He felt that. It was like someone pressing their thumb into a bruise he hadn't known was there, not sharp, but significant. He breathed out. "There," said one of the goblin healers, and there was a murmur of agreement from the others, and Lyra's hands shifted slightly, and then, the warmth changed character. It went from reading to pulling, gentle and inexorable, and Harry felt the first binding flex and then release and he gasped out loud before he could stop himself because it didn't hurt, not exactly, but the sudden absence was like having a knot in a muscle you'd stopped noticing untied all at once. There and then not there. He hadn't known it was there. "First one," Lyra said quietly. "You're all right." "Yeah," Harry said, slightly breathless. "That was weird." "They'll get more intense as we go deeper," she said. "The older ones are more embedded. They worked through the morning. By the time they stopped for the first break, at midday, they had removed 7. Harry sat on the platform and drank water and felt fundamentally strange, not bad, just different, the way a room feels different when you open a window that's been stuck shut for years. Certain things that had always been slightly muffled were louder. The sound of the trees outside. The feel of the stone under his hands. His own heartbeat. 7, he said. 7, Lyra confirmed. She was reviewing her notes with two of the goblin healers, their heads together over a diagram that was building itself in midair as they cross-referenced. The pattern is becoming clearer. The remaining 21 are in 3 distinct layers, Ragnarok. Ragnarok came forward from his station. He had a parchment that had been filling with ink throughout the morning, building a map of the binding structure as each piece was removed. He looked at Harry with that flat, attentive expression. The bindings are organized, he said, without preamble. This wasn't a single person improvising. This was a designed system. The outermost layer is mostly behavioral compulsions, obedience frameworks, lowered ambition, a specific compulsion keyed to Dumbledore's voice that would make you more receptive to his direction. A loyalty binding toward Gryffindor House, he paused. You haven't been to school yet. Muggle school, Harry said. I didn't know there was another kind until last week. Ragnarok made a sound that was not quite a word. A loyalty binding toward a Hogwarts house placed before you'd ever heard of Hogwarts. The second layer is the power suppressions, 3 separate blocks on your active magic and 2 on your passive magic, plus the squib weaving that didn't take. The third layer, he paused. The third layer is the deepest and the oldest and the most significant. The inheritance blocks, Maeve said. She had come to stand beside Ragnarok, looking at the same parchment. The inheritance blocks, Ragnarok confirmed. 2 of them. They were placed first, before any of the others, which means whoever placed them did so knowing what they were covering up. Harry looked at the parchment. The map of his own magic, laid out in ink and lines and the careful notations of 8 people who had spent a morning picking through it. What do they cover up? He asked. We'll know when they come off, Ragnarok said. But based on the shape of the suppression, he glanced at Maeve. Have you ever heard of arcane lineages? Maeve asked. Harry shook his head. Most people think the wizarding world is one thing, she said, sitting down across from him on the platform edge, the way she had the night before when she told him about the bindings, direct, no cushioning, treating him like someone who could handle direct. He'd noticed that and liked it. It's not. There are magical nations separate from the Ministry. The Goblin Nation. The Veela Nation. Centaurs. Merfolk. There are also old bloodlines within the human wizarding world that aren't simply wizard, they carry inheritances from other magical peoples, from ancient pacts, from things that happened so long ago most of the records have been lost or buried. These are called arcane lineages. They're rare. When they activate, what do? Different things, depending on the lineage. Enhanced magic. Additional senses. Abilities that have nothing to do with a wand and everything to do with what you are at a fundamental level. Harry was quiet for a moment. And you think I have one? The inheritance block has the specific structure used to suppress an arcane lineage activation, Ragnarok said. We've seen it before. Twice in the last century, both times placed by the Ministry on bloodlines they considered, he paused. Inconvenient. So when the block comes off, you'll begin to come into what you're actually supposed to be, Maeve said. It may take time. It may happen all at once. We don't know which, because we don't fully know what it is yet. Harry looked at his hands. They looked the same as they always had, too thin, slightly scraped from years of doing the Dursleys' garden work. You don't know what I am. Not precisely. But Dumbledore did. He knew enough to block it. The silence that followed that was the kind where everyone in the room knew the answer was yes and was waiting to see who would say it first. Yes, Maeve said. Harry nodded slowly. Something in his face had settled into the expression she was starting to recognize, not anger, not exactly, though it was related to anger. More like decision. A boy deciding what he was going to do with the information in front of him instead of what he was going to feel about it. He could feel later. Right now he was building something. Okay, he said. Let's do the second layer. The second layer was worse. Not in the way pain is worse, more in the way that the second layer was more personal, more deeply embedded, more him in the places it touched. The power suppressions were wound directly through his magical core, which Lyra had explained was the central reservoir of a witch or wizard's power, and removing things from the core was, she had used the word delicate and Harry had translated it correctly to mean, will hurt more. It hurt more. He stayed still throughout. He didn't ask them to stop. At one point, when they pulled the squib weaving, the thing that had been slowly strangling his access to magic since before he could walk, the thing that had made his own power bleed into ley lines because it couldn't go anywhere else, he made a sound that he immediately regretted, a short bitten-off thing, and the room went briefly tense. Lyra asked if he wanted to pause. He said no. She resumed. When the 5 suppressions came off, one by one over the course of 3 hours, the room changed. It was subtle at first, a warmth in the stone, a slight brightening of the light coming down through the ceiling shaft. By the time the last one was removed, 3 of the healers had stepped back involuntarily, not in fear but in the specific response of someone whose magic has just encountered something significantly larger than expected. Ragnarok, watching from the edge, said nothing. But he put down his parchment. Harry sat in the center of the room and breathed. He felt enormous. That was the only word for it, not physically large, nothing as crude as that, but like the space he occupied had expanded somehow, like he had been living in 2 dimensions and someone had just added a third. He could feel the room. He could feel the trees. He could feel the ley line running 70 feet below the forest floor, and it recognized him the way it had seemed to recognize Maeve the night before, and he understood suddenly that this was what she had meant when she said your aunt is wrong, not just that he wasn't imagining the magic, but that what he'd been feeling his entire life through the suppressions was a fraction of what was actually there. Harry, Lyra said carefully. I'm fine, he said. Your magic is, I know. He looked up. Sorry. I can, he stopped. The warmth that had been spreading through the room since the last suppression came off was coming from him, he realized. He breathed in and pulled it back, not extinguishing it but drawing it inward, and the healers visibly relaxed. Sorry, he said again. I didn't know I was doing it. Don't apologize, Maeve said, from his left. He hadn't heard her move. She had come to stand just outside the circle, her arms loose at her sides. Her expression was doing the same complicated thing it had done when he'd packed his bag quickly in the middle of the night, something between satisfaction and something that didn't have a word he knew. That was control. You didn't know you were projecting and the moment you did, you stopped. Is that good? For someone who had all their power suppressions removed 10 seconds ago. That's extraordinary. Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok had picked up his parchment again and was writing. One more layer, Harry said. Ragnarok looked up. Tomorrow, he said. Today is done. Harry wanted to argue. He felt the argument rise in him and then thought about Lyra's face and the way 2 of the goblin healers were quietly sitting down. The healers need to rest, he said. The healers need to rest, Ragnarok confirmed. Harry stood up from the platform, and the stone under him was warm where he'd been sitting. He stepped off and walked to the doorway and paused, looking back at the room, the circle, the healers, the map of his own magic in ink on Ragnarok's parchment. Thank you, he said. Not at anyone in particular. At all of them. Lyra nodded. The goblin healers nodded. One of them, the youngest, Harry thought, though it was hard to tell with goblins, said, Tomorrow, Lord Potter, with a formality that startled him because nobody had ever called him that before. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, and went out. Maeve found him that evening at the edge of the court where the managed forest gave way to the wild new forest, sitting on a root that had grown large enough to function as a bench. He was watching something in the undergrowth with the same focused attention he brought to everything. There was a fox, she saw, moving through the ferns about 10 feet away, and it had not run from him, which was notable. She sat on the root beside him. The fox glanced at her and kept moving. Does that happen often? She asked. Animals not running? They never really run from me, he said. I always thought it was, I don't know. I just thought it was weird. It's probably related to what's under the third layer. He watched the fox disappear into the fern. What do you think it is? Your best guess. She thought about how to answer that. The old records I've been able to access in the past 24 hours, and our archivists have been working since last night, suggest that there are two significant non-human inheritances in the Potter line. One is very old, going back over 1,000 years, and the records are fragmented. The other is more recent, only 300 years ago, and better documented. What's the more recent one? Druid heritage, she said. Specifically, a line of druids who were known for an innate connection to living magic, to ley lines and natural magical systems. Which would explain what you've been feeling your whole life. And possibly the animals. He was quiet for a moment. And the older one? We're still working on it. She paused. Harry, I want to prepare you for something. He looked at her. When the inheritance blocks come off tomorrow, she said, the activation of a suppressed lineage can be disorienting. Physically, emotionally, magically. It can feel like a great deal is happening very quickly. More than today. Possibly, yes. He thought about this. Okay. That's all. Just okay. What else would I say? She looked at him, this boy who had packed his bag in under 2 minutes at 3 in the morning and come away with 2 strangers without crying, who had sat through 7 hours of having his own magic dismantled and rebuilt around him and not once asked them to stop, who was now sitting in a forest watching foxes and asking matter-of-fact questions about his own heredity. Most people, she said, carefully, would have more to say. Most people probably had someone to talk to before now, he said, not bitterly. Just as a fact. I kind of got good at processing things on my own. She didn't say anything immediately. The forest settled around them, the sound of it large and old and indifferent in the best possible way. You're not on your own now, she said. He glanced at her. There was something very young in his face for a moment, underneath all the careful attention and the fast processing and the spine he'd been growing out of necessity, something that was just 10 years old and hadn't expected someone to say that. Then it was gone, folded back in. I know, he said. That's still, he stopped. It's new. It can be new, she said. New things are allowed to take time. He nodded. They sat in silence for a while, which was a comfortable silence, and the forest moved around them the way forests move when they're not disturbed, and the ley line deep below them hummed with something cleaner than it had hummed in years. Maeve, he said. Yes. Why did Dumbledore block my inheritance? Not the power suppressions, I get that, that's about control. But the inheritance specifically. Why does it matter what I am? She had been thinking about this since the night before, since Ragnarok had first laid out the structure of the binding system and she'd seen the inheritance block sitting at the bottom of everything like load-bearing walls. Because what you are has political implications, she said. In the wizarding world, in the structure of the Wizengamot and the Ministry, blood and lineage are power. Not just magical power. Social power. Legal power. If you have an active arcane inheritance, you have claim to seats on the Wizengamot that have been sitting vacant, to alliances and treaties that are technically still active, to resources and authority that currently no one is using because the heir with claim to them has been kept from knowing he exists. Harry stared at her. How many seats? We're working on the full count, she said. But based on the Potter and Black lines alone, and what we know of those historical alliances. At least 5. 5 seats on the Wizengamot, Harry said slowly. That currently no one, that are currently controlled by proxy through various mechanisms, yes. She looked at him steadily. Dumbledore holds 2 of those proxies himself. Harry was very quiet. He's been voting with my seats, Harry said, finally. Among other things. The fox came back to the edge of the ferns and looked at Harry directly. Harry looked back at it. It sat down. "Okay," Harry said, for the third time that day, and it meant the same thing it had meant each time, not resignation, not overwhelm, but the click of a decision being made. "Tell me what I need to know about the Wisengamot." She told him. She talked until the light faded and the court's warm gold lit the edges of the trees, and he asked questions that were better than most adult politicians' questions, and the fox fell asleep at the edge of the ferns, and Ragnarok appeared at some point and sat on a second root and added information when Maeve needed supplementing, and Harry Potter spent the evening learning about the world that had been kept from him and looking not overwhelmed but hungry, like someone who has been told they've been starving and has just found out where the kitchen is. The second day passed without incident, which was its own kind of tension. No owl from Dumbledore. No ministry representative appearing at the court's boundary. No official communication of any kind. Ragnarok found this suspicious. Maeve found it predictable. "He's not going to come at us directly," she said, over a working breakfast with Ragnarok while Harry was with Lyra for a preliminary session before the third layer work. "He's going to work through channels. He'll look for a legal angle first." "He won't find one," Ragnarok said. "The treaty invocations are clean. He'll look for an unofficial angle second." Ragnarok looked up from his documents. "You think he'll try to reach the boy through someone else? His first instinct is going to be to re-establish a relationship of trust," Maeve said. "To get Harry to come to him willingly, before we can, what Dumbledore would call, poison him against his guide and mentor." She said the last three words with a specific tone. "And his second instinct, if that fails? Political pressure on both our nations." She poured tea. "Which is why we need to move faster than I'd like on formalizing Harry's status under joint protection. Every day we wait is a day Dumbledore has to build legal challenges. I need 3 more days after today for the inheritance scan at Gringotts. Can your team work in parallel? Scan while the third layer removal is happening?" Ragnarok looked at her with the expression of someone who is professionally insulted by a question but grudgingly acknowledges its practical merit. "I'll see what can be done," he said. The third layer was a different experience from the first two. Not more painful, less, in a way, because the inheritance blocks were older and had been sitting in Harry's magic for so long they had calcified, become almost structural, and Lyra had explained that removing calcified bindings was less like pulling stitches and more like carefully dissolving old scar tissue. It took all 8 healers again, and Ragnarok and Maeve both in the room this time, and it took from mid-morning until late afternoon. At first nothing dramatic happened. The first inheritance block came off and Harry felt a warmth in his sternum and the stone under him grew a green moss in the few minutes he was sitting on it, which the goblin healers noted on their parchment without comment. The second inheritance block was the older one, the one their records hadn't been able to identify, and when Lyra carefully eased it free from the base of Harry's magical core, the room didn't warm gradually. Every plant within 20 feet of the unbinding room grew 6 inches. The stone walls cracked along existing fault lines and green stems pushed through immediately, as though they'd been waiting. The ceiling shaft filled with leaves. The ley line below them, 70 feet down, actually sang, a low resonant harmonic that Harry felt in his teeth and his chest and his hands and the healers felt as a vibration in the soles of their feet. Harry opened his eyes. They were gold. Not the iris, the entire visible surface. A deep, sustained amber gold, luminous in the green-shot light of the suddenly overgrown room. As he looked around, registering each person in the room, registering the room itself, registering the forest pressing in through the new cracks, the gold faded, receded, settled, until his eyes were green again. But different. Deeper. Like looking at a forest rather than a color. Nobody spoke for a moment. "Well," Ragnarok said. "Well," Maeve agreed. Harry looked at his hands. The light in the room was different now, there was something warm and living about it that hadn't been there before, a quality that matched the quality the forest had outside, and after a moment Harry realized it was coming from him. Not dramatically. Just, ambient. Present. I grew the plants, he said. Yes, Lyra said. Can I? He reached toward the moss that had grown on the platform around him. He touched it. It greened, intensified, spread 3 inches in 3 seconds. He pulled his hand back. Okay, he said, sounding genuinely startled for the first time in 2 days. The Potter bloodline, Ragnarok said, from his station. He was reading from a parchment that Griphook had just brought in. 1,012 years ago. There's a record in the deepest Gringotts archive of a pact between one Linfred of Stinchcombe, ancestor of the Potter line, and the Green Court. The Green Court doesn't exist anymore, Maeve said, with what sounded like surprise. They merged into the forest about 5 centuries ago. The pact was hereditary, Ragnarok said. Every 7 generations, the heir carrying the active pact binding inherits the full connection. He looked at Harry. You are, by my count, the 7th generation from the last activation. Harry looked at the plants growing through the walls. So I'm, a pact heir, Maeve said. Of the Green Court. She was looking at him with an expression that was entirely unguarded, which was rare enough for her that the court healer nearest her noticed and looked away politely. That's what Dumbledore was hiding. Not just the Druid heritage. The pact heir lineage. If it had activated on its own schedule, it would have activated at 11, Ragnarok said, still reading. At first Hogwarts attendance, in proximity to the school's own old-growth connections. Which would have been, public, Maeve finished. In front of every student and professor at Hogwarts. And completely undeniable, Ragnarok said. At which point every pact treaty still attached to the Green Court lineage would have activated simultaneously, and the Wizengamot would have had to acknowledge what? Harry asked. Ragnarok set down the parchment. He looked at Harry with the look Harry had come to understand meant Ragnarok was choosing between bluntness and diplomacy and defaulting to bluntness because that was simply his nature. That you are not a ward of the British Ministry of Magic, Ragnarok said. That you are not under Dumbledore's guardianship. That you are the pact heir of the Green Court, which predates the ministry by 8 centuries, and that as such you are a sovereign entity with treaty rights that supersede ministry law in 12 documented historical precedents. He paused. Dumbledore has known this since before you were placed on that doorstep. He bound you because if you ever knew what you were, you would have the legal standing to dismantle every structure he's built around you. The room was very quiet. The plants pressed through the walls and kept growing, slowly, because there was nothing telling them to stop. He was afraid of me, Harry said. He is afraid, Ragnarok said. Present tense. Harry looked at the ceiling, at the leaves growing in through the shaft. Then at Maeve. How long until the Gringotts scan is complete? 2 days, Ragnarok said. And then we go to the Wizengamot? Among other things, yes. Harry nodded. The gold was not in his eyes anymore, but something of it remained, a quality in his expression, a steadiness that had been building since the morning after the first night, since the 7 compulsions came off and he'd had his first unfiltered experience of the world around him. He looked like someone who has been given back something that was always theirs and is simply, quietly, deciding what to do with it. Ragnarok, he said. Yes. What exactly do I own? Ragnarok almost smiled. He picked up the parchment from Griphook's case, not the one he'd been reading, a different one, thicker, carefully rolled. He set it on his knee and looked at Harry over it. That, he said, with something that was close to relish, is going to take a while. Harry sat back down on the platform, the moss grew immediately back to his hands, and he let it this time, feeling it the way you feel something that has always been yours return to you, and said, I've got time. You do, Ragnarok agreed. And unlike yesterday, the answer is going to be significantly more interesting than your previous asset profile might suggest. Maeve sat against the wall and watched Ragnarok begin to read, and watched Harry listen, and listened herself, and outside the unbinding room the new forest pressed close and quiet, and the ley line below it sang its low satisfied harmonic into the stone and the roots and the old dark earth, and for the first time in 10 years, nothing bled into it that shouldn't have been there. It was clean. Chapter 3, What the Vaults Remember. Gringotts at 9 in the morning was all marble and noise and the specific controlled chaos of an institution that processed more wealth before noon than most countries saw in a year. The public hall was full, wizards in robes, the occasional muggleborn looking overwhelmed, goblin tellers moving with efficient contempt behind the counters, the great doors open to Diagon Alley letting in September light and the smell of bakeries and parchment and something sulphurous from the apothecary 2 doors down. Harry walked through the front doors and nobody looked at him twice. He was wearing clothes that actually fit. Maeve's court had produced them that morning without explanation, which he suspected meant someone had gone shopping, and he'd accepted this the way he'd been accepting most things since Tuesday, which was gratefully and without making a production of it. Plain dark trousers, a grey shirt, a jacket that was slightly too well made for a 10-year-old, but that was apparently the Veela court's minimum acceptable standard. His glasses were the same, still held with tape, because there hadn't been time to deal with that yet, and he had privately decided they were staying until he chose to deal with them himself. Ash walked 2 steps behind him. Maeve had offered a full guard escort. Harry had negotiated it down to Ash, on the grounds that walking into Gringotts with 6 Veela warriors behind him would attract more attention than the alternative, which was being a 10-year-old boy with a very large woman who looked like she could stop traffic with her expression. Maeve had accepted this negotiation with what Harry was beginning to recognize as her version of impressed, which was a very slight pause followed by no argument. Ragnarok met them inside, not at the public counters but at the door to the private corridors, with Griphook and 2 other goblins Harry hadn't met. They moved into the back of the bank quickly, the noise of the public hall dropping away behind them, replaced by the amberlit quiet of the private sections. "The inheritance ritual chamber is prepared," Ragnarok said, without preamble. "The scan we ran in parallel with the unbinding was preliminary. The ritual will give us the full picture, every active claim, every dormant claim, every vault status, and the complete lineage record." "How long does it take?" Harry asked. "For a standard account holder, 20 minutes. Ragnarok glanced at him sideways. "For a pact heir with at least 2 documented arcane inheritances and accounts in 4 separate vault tiers, we've allocated 3 hours. 3 hours of sitting in a room? 3 hours of a ritual that will feel like nothing for most of it and like a great deal for a small portion of it. The inheritance acknowledgement is active." He paused. "You'll know when it happens." They passed through 2 checkpoints, not standard bank security but something heavier, older, the kind of wards that had been laid when the bank was first built and had only grown denser over centuries. Harry felt them register him, the way the blood wards at Privet Drive had, but with a different quality. Those had felt like recognition. These felt like assessment. "They're deciding if I'm who I say I am," Harry said, about the second set. Ragnarok looked at him. "Yes. Do I need to do anything?" "Just walk." He walked. The wards hummed, adjusted, and then settled into something that felt almost like deference, as though the bank itself had considered him and arrived at an opinion. The door at the end of the corridor, which was iron and covered in runes that shifted as Harry approached, unlocked itself before Griphook reached for it. Griphook looked at the door. Looked at Harry. Wrote something in his ledger. The inheritance ritual chamber was underground, a level below the private corridors, and it was the most specifically goblin room Harry had seen so far, no concessions to human aesthetics, no attempt at comfort in any conventional sense. The walls were rough stone carved with generations of text in a script that Harry recognized as gobbledygook without being able to read it. The floor was a mosaic of metals worked into patterns that seemed simple until you looked at them directly, at which point they became something else. In the center was a shallow stone basin, waist-high, filled with a liquid that was neither water nor fire but had qualities of both. "That's what we use," Griphook said. "A few drops of blood. The basin reads the lineage and outputs a complete record." "A few drops," Harry said. 3, standardly. Griphook produced a small silver instrument with the business-like air of a professional who had done this 10,000 times. It doesn't hurt significantly. Harry rolled up his sleeve without being asked. Griphook was precise and fast, and it was over in 2 seconds. 3 drops fell into the basin. They hit the surface and then the liquid moved. Not sloshing, the movement was purposeful, internal, the surface remaining flat while something below it organized itself with tremendous speed. Then the basin lit from within and the light hit the walls and the text carved there, and the text moved. Harry stared. It was sorting, rearranging, entire sections of wall text flowing to new positions as the record built. Then the basin went still. And then it spoke. Not in words, in a resonance that Harry felt in his chest and his teeth and the palms of his hands, the same harmonic the ley line had produced when the second inheritance block came off, but structured, intentional, carrying information in the way music carries emotion. "It's acknowledging you," Ragnarok said quietly. "The bank. The record. All of it." He sounded as close to reverent as Harry suspected Ragnarok ever got. "In 1,000 years of inheritance rituals, we have seen the bank respond like this for," he paused, "a very small number of people." The resonance faded and the basin projected, actually projected, into the air above it in 3 dimensions, a lineage tree. Not a simple one. Something vast, branching in directions that weren't strictly linear, with nodes Harry couldn't read and connections that ran in colors he didn't have names for. At the top, alone in a bright point of gold-green light, was his name. Griphook began reading. It took an hour. Harry sat on the floor next to the basin. There were no chairs in this room either. He was starting to think goblins had a philosophical objection to chairs, and listened and asked questions when he needed to, and took in what was in front of him with the same patient intensity he'd been using all week. The Potter vaults, 3 of them, not 1. The main vault, which Harry had known about in the vague way you know about things people have mentioned around you, held a sum that he didn't react to visibly but which made Ash, standing at the door, blink once. The secondary vault held documents, deeds, treaties, contracts, correspondence going back 4 centuries. The tertiary vault held objects, artifacts, things the Potter family had accumulated and preserved, some of which Griphook noted carefully were of significant magical importance and had been listed as lost or destroyed by the Ministry. They weren't lost. They were here. Untouched. The Black Vaults, more complicated. The estate had been subjected to a contested will. Sirius Black, Harry's godfather, had been in Azkaban since Harry was 15 months old. The contested nature of the will had created a situation where 2 Black Vaults were under a Ministry hold, but 3 others had passed to Harry as the named alternate heir, and a 4th had passed to him through a separate clause that had apparently been written by someone who'd anticipated exactly the kind of interference that had occurred. "My godfather is in Azkaban," Harry said, when Griphook paused. "Yes." "Was there a trial?" Griphook and Ragnarok exchanged a look. "No," Ragnarok said. Harry filed this away. His expression didn't change. "Continue." "The Wisengamot seats, 5 of them, as Maeve had estimated. 2 Potter seats, 2 Black seats through the inheritance, and 1 Peverell seat that nobody appeared to have noticed was attached to the Potter line through a female line inheritance 3 generations back. All 5 were currently unoccupied, 3 of them being controlled by proxy votes authorized through a legal mechanism that Griphook explained with the careful neutrality of someone reading out a crime in official language. One of the proxy authorizations bore Dumbledore's seal. Harry looked at the proxy document for a long time. "He's been voting these seats for 9 years, Harry said. "Since you were placed in non-magical guardianship, which legally created a vacancy requiring proxy administration," Griphook said. "Standard procedure would have been a neutral ministry official. Instead, he took them himself." Harry set the document down on the floor beside him. He looked at Ragnarok. "Is that legal?" "Technically, within the letter of the proxy administration statute." Ragnarok's tone made his opinion of this fact very clear. "In practice, it represents a conflict of interest of considerable magnitude," since Dumbledore is also chief warlock of the body whose composition he was influencing through those votes. He paused. There are several votes in the past 9 years whose outcomes would have been different without those 5 seats. Which votes? Ragnarok looked at him. Then he reached into Griphook's case and pulled out a separate document. Shall I list them? Yes. He listed them. It took 20 minutes. Harry sat on the stone floor of the inheritance chamber and listened to the record of 9 years of political decisions that had been made using his voice, his power, his name, and none of his knowledge or consent, and the expression on his face was the same throughout, that settled, focused quality, though Ash, who had been watching him since the Privet Drive doorway and had gotten fairly good at reading him in 4 days, noticed that his right hand on the floor beside him pressed flat against the stone until his knuckles were white. When Ragnarok finished, Harry said, "Is there anything else?" "The creature inheritance assessment," Griphook said. He consulted the lineage tree still floating above the basin. "The druid line is confirmed and active. The pact heir status is confirmed and documented. We've flagged all 12 precedents in the system and they're attached to your account record. There is also," he paused, consulting a secondary section of the tree. "This is unusual. There's a third inheritance that we hadn't detected before the unbinding." "What kind?" Maeve asked, from where she'd been standing against the far wall for the past hour. "Small," Griphook said, with the air of someone who finds small things interesting rather than dismissible. "A single ancestor, 8 generations back, on the Potter maternal line. The records identify her as," he read the name in gobbledygook, then translated. "Roughly, in English, a speaker." "A speaker," Harry said. "Someone with the ability to communicate with natural magical creatures beyond normal human capacity," Griphook said. "Not Parseltongue, that's a specific variant. This is broader. The record shows deer, wolves, birds of significant magical resonance." "It would explain, the fox," Maeve said. "The fox," Harry agreed. He looked at Griphook. "Is it active? Like the rest?" "It would have been active to some degree all along," Griphook said. "The inheritance block wouldn't have suppressed it completely, it's too minor to warrant the full suppression structure. It's more likely it's been working but you had no framework to understand it." Harry thought about every animal that had ever behaved unusually around him. The ones at the zoo. The neighbor's cat that sat on his windowsill despite the Dursleys' persistent attempts to discourage it. The birds. "Right," he said quietly. "There is one final item," Griphook said, and his tone changed, became, if possible, more careful. "The scar." The room's atmosphere shifted subtly. "The ritual picked it up," Griphook continued. "It registers as a foreign magical attachment. Significant and unusual. The inheritance record identifies it not as a wound but as the basin's classification is," he looked at the floating tree for a moment. "A container. A fragment of foreign soul, bound to the scar tissue by the same dark magic that killed your parents." The room was very quiet. Harry touched his forehead, once, lightly. "Voldemort," he said. "A fragment of his soul," Griphook confirmed. "The ritual cannot remove it, it's outside our jurisdiction and requires specific expertise. But it has been catalogued and isolated in the record, and the unbinding process has at least contained it. The structure around your core that was removed over the past 3 days was partially functioning to keep the fragment's influence suppressed, but incorrectly. Now that the bindings are gone, your own magical core is doing the work far more efficiently." Harry lowered his hand. He looked at the basin for a moment. Then at Maeve. She was looking at him with an expression that was doing several things at once, the complicated one, and she said nothing, because there was nothing to say about this that was worth saying with words right now. "Later," Harry said, meaning the soul fragment. "We deal with that later." "Yes," Maeve said. "Later." Harry stood up from the floor, brushed stone dust from his trousers, and looked at the floating lineage tree one more time. His name at the top, in gold-green light. All of it underneath, centuries of history, legal claims, political power, things Dumbledore had spent 9 years sitting on. I want copies of everything, he said. Every document in those vaults, the deeds, the treaties, the correspondence. Everything in the secondary vault especially. We'll have them prepared within the day, Griphook said. And the proxy authorizations, I want those revoked. Today. The legal mechanism for revocation requires your signature, your presence, and a formal statement of competency. Griphook was already reaching for the relevant forms. Since you are underage, the pact heir status, Ragnarok said, from beside them. The precedents override the underage provision. A pact heir of the Green Court is treated as a sovereign entity for the purposes of estate management. There is no age restriction. Griphook looked at Harry. Then I'll need your signature here, here, and here, he said, pointing to 3 places on the form. Harry signed. His signature was the signature of a 10-year-old, still learning its own shape, but it went onto the parchment and the parchment glowed once and the proxy authorization for Dumbledore's seal began to redact itself, line by line, methodically, with the patient thoroughness of a bank that had been waiting a long time to do exactly this. Harry watched it happen. Good, he said. They used a private conference room above the vault levels for the afternoon session, Harry, Maeve, Ragnarok, and Griphook, with documents spread across a table large enough to embarrass most dining rooms. Ash stood at the door and ate an apple with the focus of someone completing a professional task. Harry had been reading for an hour when the door opened without a knock. Ash had her hand on her weapon before the door was fully open, which was impressively fast, but Ragnarok had already looked up and settled slightly, which Harry had learned meant it was someone expected or at least known. The girl who came through the door was perhaps 15 or 16, with silver blonde hair that had the same luminous quality as Maeve's but worn loose rather than pinned, and she was carrying a stack of documents that she set on the edge of the table with the crisp efficiency of someone who had been sent to deliver them and had decided delivery should be done with conviction. She looked at Harry. He looked at her. "You're the child they found," she said, in slightly accented English. French underneath, Harry thought. "I'm Harry," he said. "Fleur," she said. "Fleur Delacour. My grandmother is of Maeve's court, I'm visiting." She looked at the documents spread across the table, then at Maeve. "Grandmere said you wanted the France-side documentation on the pact lineage." "Said it with the rest," Maeve said. Fleur said it. She didn't leave immediately. She was looking at Harry with the slightly appraising expression of someone who has heard a great deal about a person and is now determining how much of it was accurate. "You don't look like what everyone says," she said. "What does everyone say?" Harry asked. "That you're the boy who lived. The symbol. The weapon." She said the last word with specific distaste. "You look like someone who's been reading for an hour and is slightly annoyed about what he's finding." "Both things can be true," Harry said. Fleur almost smiled. It was the almost that made it interesting, like a smile was available to her but she had standards for when it deployed. "Fair," she said. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without being invited, which Harry found he didn't mind. She reached across and picked up one of the secondary documents, a treaty from 1743, and read the first page. "This one's interesting. The Potter Line held navigation rights over the Northern Ley corridor through this. It's still active. Nobody's been using it." "I know," Harry said. "I found it 20 minutes ago." "The navigation rights extend to allied parties," she said, not looking up from the page. "If the Veela nation were formally allied, Fleur," Maeve said. "I'm just pointing it out," Fleur said, setting the document down. She looked at Harry again. "How are you finding all of this?" Everything." She gestured at the room, at him, at the general situation. "Useful," Harry said. "And annoying." "Useful and annoying," she repeated. "Yes, that is an accurate summary of learning what was taken from you." Something in her expression shifted into something more real. It happened to the Delacour line as well. 50 years ago, during the Grindelwald conflict, records lost, treaties voided, inheritances blocked. My mother spent 15 years rebuilding what should have been hers by birth. She paused. It is an exhausting kind of anger to carry. Harry looked at her. I'm not finding it exhausting, he said. No. It's clarifying. He looked back at the documents. Every page I read, it gets clearer exactly what has to happen. Exhausting implies I'm not sure what to do. I'm very sure what to do. Fleur looked at him for a moment with an expression that had moved past appraising into something more like respect. You are 10, she said. Yes. That is a very 40-year-old thing to say. Is that bad? No, she said. It's just notable. Ragnarok made a sound that might, in a different creature, have been a laugh. Late afternoon brought the news Ragnarok had been waiting for, delivered by a Gringotts runner in the form of a brief note that Ragnarok read, reread, and then set on the table with the deliberate care of someone handling something mildly explosive. Dumbledore has filed an emergency petition with the Wisengamot, he said. He's requesting a hearing on the quote, unlawful removal of a ministry-designated ward from his place of legal residence. He filed it as unlawful removal? Maeve said. He filed it under a child welfare statute, Ragnarok said. Specifically the one that allows the ministry to override non-ministry custody arrangements in cases of perceived risk to the child. He paused. The irony is not lost on me. When is the hearing? Harry asked. He's requesting emergency consideration. That could be as little as 4 days. 4 days is enough time, Harry said. Enough time for what? Fleur asked. She'd stayed through the afternoon, working through documents alongside Harry with the efficiency of someone who found this genuinely interesting and had decided her grandmother's court visit could wait. To be ready, Harry said. He looked at Maeve. The formal Joint Protection Declaration, you said it has to be made publicly to carry the most legal weight. A Veela Nation Compact invocation combined with a Gringotts Sovereignty Declaration, made before the Wisengamot, establishes protections that override ministry custodial statutes, Maeve confirmed. Yes. So we go to the Wisengamot, Harry said. Not because Dumbledore called a hearing. We go because we choose to. We go before his petition is heard, we file the declarations, and we make the case ourselves. He looked at Ragnarok. Can that be arranged? You want to request a floor address before the Wisengamot? Ragnarok said. I want to walk into the Wisengamot holding 5 seats and speak from all of them, Harry said. Can that be arranged? Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Maeve was quiet for a moment. Fleur, to her credit, was not quiet, she made a sound that was specifically French and specifically impressed. A pactaire requesting a floor address has precedent, Ragnarok said carefully. Under Statute 89 of the original Wisengamot Charter, which predates the current ministry structure, a holder of 3 or more hereditary seats can request immediate floor access. We would need to file the request through the Wisengamot clerk by end of business tomorrow. Do it, Harry said. You'll need to be prepared, Maeve said. The Wisengamot is, I've been reading their session records for 4 days, Harry said. He looked at the pile of documents in front of him. Tell me which ones I still need. Maeve looked at him. Then at Ragnarok. Then back at Harry. The proxy votes cast in your name, she said. The inheritance fraud statutes. The pactaire precedents, all 12. She paused. And the record of your parents' will. Harry stilled. Their will. It was contested, Maeve said, gently but directly. James and Lily Potter named Sirius Black as your guardian. Dumbledore overrode it. Harry was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he picked up his quill. Find me the will, he said. Griphook was already moving to a filing cabinet. He found it in under a minute, the Gringotts copy, the one the bank had held sealed since October 1981. He set it on the table in front of Harry. Harry opened it. He read it slowly. His parents' handwriting, his mother's neat and precise, his father's slightly more impatient, both of them on the same document, signed and witnessed and absolutely clear. Sirius Orion Black named as primary guardian. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore specifically excluded, and the reasons given in terms that were not diplomatic. Harry set the document down. They knew, he said. My parents knew not to trust him. Yes, Maeve said. And he overrode their will anyway. Through a combination of the emergency custodial order he filed the night they died and the legal vacuum created by Sirius's arrest without trial, Ragnarok said. Each piece, alone, could be challenged. Together, they created a situation that was difficult to untangle without the documents we now have. We have them now, Harry said. Yes. Then we use them. He closed the will carefully and set it to the side, his pile, not the general working pile. What time does the Wisengamot session start? Standard morning session is 10 o'clock, Ragnarok said. We file the floor access request tomorrow morning, Harry said. I want to be in that chamber in 2 days. Harry, Maeve said. 2 days is, I know it's fast. He looked at her. Dumbledore filed his petition today. By tomorrow he'll be working his alliances, the people who owe him favors, the people he's been voting for with my seats for 9 years. Every day we wait is a day he's building his case. He looked at the will, at the proxy revocation documents, at the inheritance records. We have everything we need. We just have to go use it. Maeve looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Maeve. This look communicated something that took 2 seconds and required no words. I'll have the floor access request filed by 9 tomorrow morning, Ragnarok said. I'll have your court robes prepared, Maeve said. Not Hogwarts robes. Not ministry dress robes. Court robes, packed air formal. You'll wear what you are. Harry nodded. He looked back down at the documents. Then let's keep reading, he said. Fleur, across the table, quietly pulled another stack of documents toward her and began sorting them in the order Harry would need them. She didn't make a production of this. She just did it, with the efficiency of someone who had decided to be useful and didn't need acknowledgement for it. Harry glanced at her. Thanks, he said. Don't thank me, she said, without looking up. Just win. They were still there at midnight, the 4 of them around the table, Harry, Maeve, Ragnarok, and Fleur, who had apparently decided her grandmother's court visit was going to incorporate a detour, when the second note arrived from the Gringotts runner. Ragnarok read it. His expression went through something. What? Harry asked. Ragnarok set the note down. Dumbledore came to the bank today, he said. In person. He requested access to the Potter primary account. He was informed it was under active remediation and access was blocked by treaty provision. He paused. He then requested a meeting with me. Did he get one? He was informed I was unavailable. Ragnarok paused again. He left a letter. He produced it. A crisp envelope, sealed with a wax impression of a phoenix. Harry looked at it. Can I open it? Ragnarok slid it across the table. Harry broke the seal. The letter inside was handwritten, a flowing elegant script, warm in tone, the kind of warm that had been calibrated very carefully over a long career. Dear Harry, I imagine you have been told many things over the past few days that have alarmed and upset you. I want you to know that I understand, and that I hold no ill feelings toward those who took you. They acted, I believe, from genuine concern, even if their methods were extreme. However, I have been your guardian since before you could walk, and I have a responsibility to ensure your safety and well-being that I cannot simply set aside. I would very much like to speak with you, just the 2 of us, before any further decisions are made about your future. I am not your enemy, Harry. Everything I have done has been done to protect you. I think if we could simply talk, you would understand this. Your friend and guardian, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and set it on the table. He looked at Ragnarok. He called himself my guardian, Harry said. Past tense in the proxy revocation. As of this afternoon, he has no legal standing over me at all. Correct, Ragnarok said. And he knows that. He filed the Wisengamot petition, which means he's seen the proxy revocations. Harry picked up the envelope. So this letter isn't to me. It's for documentation purposes. He wants a record of reaching out. He wants to be able to say he tried to talk to me before things escalated. He looked at Maeve. He's setting up his defense. Maeve looked at the letter. He's also hoping you're 10 years old enough to be moved by the warm tone. I'm not, Harry said. No, Maeve said. You're not. He set the letter to the side. Keep it, he told Ragnarok. It might be useful to have. Already intending to, Ragnarok said. Harry looked at the documents in front of him, at the window across the room showing the nighttime Diagon Alley below, at the letter from Dumbledore sitting in its careful envelope. Then he looked at the will, his parents' handwriting, their certainty about who they trusted and who they didn't. 2 days, he said. 2 days, Ragnarok confirmed. Outside, Diagon Alley went about its nighttime business, and somewhere in Britain Albus Dumbledore was doing the same, thinking, planning, building, the way he had been building for 9 years, and the difference now was that Harry Potter was doing exactly the same thing, and the tools in front of him were the truth. Chapter 4, Crowns and Contracts. The Wisengamot chamber was underground, which Harry found appropriate. It had the specific quality of a place that had been important for a very long time and knew it, old stone, tiered seating rising in concentric circles around a central floor, every surface worn smooth by centuries of robes and hands and the particular friction of power being exercised. The acoustics were designed so that a person standing in the center could be heard clearly at every tier without raising their voice, which was either elegant architecture or a warning, depending on your perspective. Harry stood at the entrance corridor and looked at it for 30 seconds. Then he walked in. The robes were Maeve's doing and they were not subtle. Deep green, the specific green of Old Forest, not the bright green of decoration, with silver embroidery along the collar and cuffs that, if you looked closely, were the binding script of the Green Court Pact, worked in thread by a court seamstress who had apparently stayed up most of the night to finish them. No house crest. No school affiliation. No ministry insignia. Just the pact markings and his name, in small silver letters at the left breast, H. J. Potter Peveril, the hyphenated form that acknowledged all 4 of the active lineages and which Griphook had told him, with something approaching satisfaction, had not appeared on any official document in approximately 200 years. Ash walked 3 steps behind him. Not at his shoulder, behind him, precisely, the position of a formal guard escort rather than a minder, which was a distinction that mattered in this room. Maeve walked at his left. Ragnarok at his right. The chamber was full. It was not normally full for a morning session. Most Wisengamot sessions had attendance in the comfortable 50s, enough for quorum, enough for the routine business of magical governance. Today, every tier was occupied. Word had gotten out, or been let out, depending on whether you believed in the organic spread of significant news or had spent any time watching how Dumbledore operated. Harry noted the full chamber and did not slow down. The floor had 5 seats arranged to one side, formally labeled, the signage restored by Gringotts overnight following the proxy revocations, Potter, 2, Black, 2, Peveril, 1, the placards new against Old Stone. Across the floor, the Chief Warlock's chair sat at the chamber's head, elevated by 3 steps. Empty, currently. Dumbledore had not yet arrived. Harry walked to the 5 seats. He sat down in the center one. Maeve took a position standing at the floor's edge. Veela queens were not Wisengamot members but had observer status under the compact, and she exercised it in a way that made clear the distinction between observer and audience was one she found largely theoretical. Ragnarok stood at the other side of the floor with Griphook, their documents already arranged. The chamber watched all of this happen. A witch in purple robes on the second tier leaned to her neighbor and said something. A wizard with a ministry badge on his lapel was writing. Several people Harry didn't know were looking at him with expressions that ranged from curious to calculating to, in one specific case, a man with pale blonde hair on the fourth tier, something colder. Lucius Malfoy. Harry had read enough in the past 4 days to know that face. Harry looked at him for exactly 1 second and then moved his attention forward. The chamber filled the rest of the way in the next 15 minutes, the ambient noise level of professional politics, low conversations, rustling papers, the occasional sharp greeting, rising and then settling as more members arrived. Harry read the proxy revocation copies that Griphook had sent over an hour ago for the 5th time, not because he needed to but because staying occupied was better than performing patience he didn't currently feel. Dumbledore arrived at 5 minutes to 10. He came through the upper entrance, which was the Chief Warlock's entrance, and he came the way he always moved in public, unhurried, present, the kind of entrance that managed to be neither dramatic nor ignorable. White robes today. The half-moon glasses. An expression of calm benevolence that Harry suspected had been built over a very long time and used so often it had become reflexive. He came down the central steps and his eyes found Harry immediately. Of course they did, he'd known Harry would be here, had come knowing it, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw the robes and the seat and the legal team was a complicated one that he smoothed into something warmer so quickly Harry would have missed it if he hadn't been watching specifically for the moment before the smoothing happened. "Harry," Dumbledore said. He stopped at the edge of the floor, not approaching the seats directly. His voice was exactly what the letter's tone had promised, warm, gently concerned, the voice of someone performing patience as a form of authority. "I'm glad you're here. I had hoped we might speak before the session." "We're speaking now," Harry said. "I meant privately." "I don't have anything to say to you privately." Harry held his eyes. "What I have to say, I'll say here." Something moved in Dumbledore's expression, not anger, not quite. A recalibration. He was adjusting his approach the way someone adjusts a plan when the opening move doesn't go as expected, and he did it smoothly enough that most people in the room probably didn't see it happen. Harry saw it happen. "As you wish," Dumbledore said, with a gracious nod, and moved to the Chief Warlock's chair and took his seat. The session opened with procedural business. It always did, Ragnarok had explained, because the Wizengamot protected itself from being rushed by surrounding everything with procedure. Harry sat through the procedural business with visible patience and used the time to look at the room, to map faces to the names and voting records he'd memorized. He found Madame Bones, Susan Bones's aunt, head of the DMLE, one of the few members whose record over the past 9 years was clean. He found Minister Fudge, currently serving his 2nd term, whose record was less clean and considerably more useful to Dumbledore. He found 6 faces he recognized from proxy vote analyses, people who had been voting with Dumbledore's direction consistently enough that the pattern held statistical significance. He found Lucius Malfoy again on the 4th tier. Malfoy had not stopped watching him. Harry looked at him the same way he'd looked at him before, 1 second, steady, entirely unbothered, and then away. At 10:17, the procedural clerk announced, "Floor address, requested under Wizengamot Charter Statute 89, from the holder of the Potter, Black, and Peverell hereditary seats. Harry James Potter Peverell." The chamber went quiet in a specific way, the way a room goes quiet when everyone present stops pretending they were doing something else and admits they came to see this. Harry stood up. He walked to the center of the floor. He stood in the spot designed for the acoustics, the one where you didn't need to raise your voice, and he looked up at the tiers without anything on his face that resembled nerves, because he wasn't nervous, he was prepared, and prepared felt different from nervous the way a sharpened knife feels different from an unused one. "My name is Harry James Potter Peverell," he said. "I hold 5 hereditary seats in this body. For the past 9 years, all 5 were controlled by proxy. I revoked those proxies yesterday. I'm here today to explain why, and to present documentation that I believe requires this body's formal attention." He paused. The chamber was very quiet. I was removed from my home on Tuesday of this week by Maeve Solane, Queen of the British Veela nation, and Ragnarok, High Chief of the Goblin nation, acting under the terms of the Veela Compact with the Crown and the Gringotts 400-year Treaty of Remediation respectively. The reason for my removal was the discovery, through a ley line survey, that I was carrying 28 illegal magical modifications, compulsions, behavioral bindings, power suppressions, and inheritance blocks, that had been placed on me without consent, without ministry notification, and without the knowledge of anyone who might have acted to address them. He let that sit for a moment. Griphook of Gringotts will provide the formal documentation of all 28 modifications, including magical signature analysis identifying their sources. I'd ask the clerk to log these as entered evidence. Griphook was already moving. Copies of the documentation went to the clerk's station, to the floor record, and, Harry had specifically requested this, to every active member's seat simultaneously, distributed by a Gringotts automated system that was one of the bank's less advertised services. The sound of documentation arriving at 150 seats was a very specific kind of paper rustling, and it lasted for approximately 15 seconds, and it was the most satisfying sound Harry had heard all week. Among the 28 modifications, Harry continued, as the rustling settled, 8 bear the magical signature of Albus Dumbledore. The oldest of these was placed before I was 1 year old. They include 2 power suppressions, 3 behavioral compulsions, including a loyalty binding toward a specific Hogwarts house and a receptivity compulsion keyed to Dumbledore's own voice, and an inheritance block suppressing both my Pactair lineage and my Druid heritage. The Pactair lineage, specifically, would have given me legal standing as a sovereign entity under 12 documented historical precedents, which would have made it impossible for Dumbledore to hold proxy control over my Wizengamot seats. He paused. I'll let this body draw its own conclusions about why that lineage was the first thing blocked. The rustling in the chamber had a different quality now. People were reading. Not performing reading, actually reading, going through the documentation with the attention of people who recognized what they were looking at. The proxy votes, Harry said, cast through my seats over the past 9 years are documented in the attached records. I would direct this body's particular attention to 7 specific votes whose outcomes would have differed without my seat's participation, and which I believe benefited the proxy holder in ways that represent a conflict of interest incompatible with his continued role as Chief Warlock. Those votes are marked in green in the documentation. He heard someone on the second tier say something to their neighbor in a sharp undertone. He heard Fudge's voice, almost sub-vocalized, "This is, someone find out who prepared these documents." The documents were prepared by Gringotts, Harry said, without looking at Fudge. The acoustics were excellent in both directions. Their legal standing is established by the 400-year treaty and is not subject to ministry challenge. Fudge made a sound. Finally, Harry said, "I'm submitting the formal declarations." He looked up at Ragnarok, who nodded. The Goblin Nation, under the Treaty of Remediation, declares Harry James Potter Peverell under sovereign account protection, effective Tuesday of this week and ongoing. This declaration supersedes any ministry custodial arrangement, past or current. The Veela Nation, under compact with the Crown, invokes formal protected status for Harry James Potter Peverell under the dark magic threat provisions of the compact, which remain active until my medical team at the Veela court formally certifies the removal process complete. He looked up at the tiers for a moment. Then, I'd also ask the clerk to note that the last will and testament of James Fleamont Potter and Lily Euphemia Potter, witnessed and notarized in October 1981, explicitly names Sirius Orion Black as my legal guardian and explicitly excludes Albus Dumbledore. The will was overridden by an emergency custodial order filed on the night of the 1st of November 1981 by Dumbledore himself, despite the explicit provisions of the will. Sirius Black, the named guardian, was arrested the same week without trial and has been imprisoned in Azkaban for 9 years. He paused. I'd ask this body to consider whether those 2 facts are a coincidence. He walked back to his seats and sat down. The chamber did not explode. It did something more controlled and more dangerous, which was the sound of 150 political professionals simultaneously reassessing the landscape they thought they understood. Dumbledore had not moved during Harry's address. He sat in the Chief Warlock's chair with his hands folded and his expression carrying the specific quality of a man who is engaged in very fast internal work while presenting a surface of unhurried contemplation. When Harry sat down, Dumbledore stood. "Might I respond?" he said. "The floor is open," the procedural clerk said, in a tone suggesting she was reading from script and grateful for it. Dumbledore came down the 3 steps from his chair and stood in the center of the floor. He was significantly more physically imposing than Harry at the center of a room, and he used this without appearing to use it, the way practiced authority figures use their physical presence, not aggressively, just as a given. "I am grateful for the opportunity to address this body directly," he said, "particularly given the gravity of the claims just made by a child who, however remarkable, has been in possession of the documents he just cited for approximately 48 hours. He turned slightly, including the upper tiers in his address. "I do not dispute that magical modifications were found on Harry. I have, in fact, been aware of certain protective enchantments placed on him since infancy, not by me, but by his mother, whose sacrifice created protections that are not fully understood even now. 8 of the 28 carry your signature," Harry said, from his seat. He didn't stand. The acoustics carried it perfectly. The signature analysis Gringotts uses for identification is a probabilistic assessment, it is a deterministic analysis based on a unique identifier that cannot be shared between practitioners, Ragnarok said, from the floor's edge. His voice was completely flat. "I am happy to explain the methodology to this body at whatever length is required." A brief silence. "I placed protections on Harry," Dumbledore said, modulating smoothly into a different version of the same argument. "I will not pretend otherwise. I placed them because I still believe, that the threat Voldemort posed and continues to pose required Harry to be protected in ways that his young mind could not have chosen to accept or refuse. I made a decision on his behalf that I believed was in his best interest." "You blocked his inheritance," Maeve said, from the floor's edge. Her voice was not loud. "It didn't need to be. You blocked a packed heir lineage that was not yours to touch. Under the Compact's provisions, the suppression of a natural arcane inheritance constitutes an act of magical violence against the inheritor's sovereignty." She looked at him without the careful diplomacy of someone who needs something from the person they're looking at. "You have been in violation of the Veela Compact for 9 years. The word violence sat in the chamber's air. "Maeve," Dumbledore said, with a tone that suggested he was above using her title but was choosing not to stoop to that particular battle. "I respect the Veela nation and the Compact profoundly. But surely you can acknowledge that wartime decisions—" "The war ended in 1981, Maeve said. The bindings were renewed in 1984. And 1987. And 1989. Another silence. Longer. "They were renewed," Dumbledore said, "because the threat was not, the dates are in the documentation," Harry said, still from his seat. Pages 9 through 14. Each renewal is timestamped. The 1989 renewal was 4 months after a ministry assessment concluded that Voldemort had no viable path to corporeal resurrection. He paused. "I found that one particularly interesting." Madame Bones, on the second tier, had her documentation open to page 11. She was reading with an expression that Harry, from the floor, couldn't fully see but which the witch beside her was very carefully not reacting to. Dumbledore turned to face Harry directly, which was a shift. He had been addressing the chamber, performing for an audience. Now he was talking to Harry specifically, and the tone changed, became warmer, more personal, more careful. "Harry," he said. "I know this feels like a betrayal. I understand why. You've been given information, out of context, by people who, however well-intentioned, do not have the full picture of what has been required to keep you safe. I have made decisions that I would prefer to explain to you privately, as your guardian." "You're not my guardian," Harry said. "Not loudly. The proxy revocation removed your legal standing over my person as well as my assets. As of yesterday, you have no authority over me of any kind." He looked at Dumbledore without anger, without heat, with the quality Maeve had been watching build in him all week, that settled, unbothered certainty. You can call yourself my friend and my protector and my guide. Those are words. The documentation is what it is. Something changed in Dumbledore's face. Very briefly, less than a second, and then gone. But it had been there. Then I would ask this body, Dumbledore said, turning back to the chamber, to consider what is being proposed here. A 10-year-old boy, however capable, however well-advised, making independent legal and political decisions of this magnitude, under the guidance of two non-human nations who have their own interests in the outcome, is not, I'd like to speak, said a voice from the second tier. Madame Bones stood up. She was a square-jawed, monocled witch who Harry had read about in 3 separate documentation sets and who had a reputation for the kind of bluntness that made her unpopular at ministry dinners and effective at everything else. The documentation, she said, holding up her copy, is the most comprehensive inheritance fraud case I've seen cross this floor in 20 years of membership. The magical signature analysis alone, and I've reviewed Gringotts' methodology before, Chief Warlock, and it is in fact deterministic, establishes 8 modifications attributable to your signature, placed on a minor without parental consent, without ministry notification, and without any legal authorization that I can find on pages 9 through 22. She looked at Dumbledore over her monocle. I'd like to know, specifically and on the record, under what legal authority you placed any of these 8 modifications. Dumbledore looked at her. Amelia, on the record, Bones said. The chamber was very quiet. The emergency of the situation in 1981, Dumbledore began. Is not a law, Bones said. Emergency is not a law. What law? Specifically. Another silence. It lasted long enough to be significant. I believe the greater good required, Dumbledore said. Greater good is also not a law, Bones said, and sat back down. The session lasted 3 hours. There were speeches, several of them, from several tiers, and they ranged from outraged on Harry's behalf to carefully neutral to one specific address from a wizard in the 4th tier whose name Harry had highlighted in his documentation as a consistent Dumbledore ally, who attempted to argue that the Gringotts Treaty did not supersede ministry custody statutes, and who was corrected by Ragnarok in approximately 90 seconds with the specific efficiency of someone who had prepared for exactly this argument. Lucius Malfoy did not speak. He watched. His expression through the 3 hours was the one Harry had seen when he first walked in, cold, calculating, specifically focused. Not on Dumbledore. On Harry. Harry was aware of this the way you're aware of a closed door in a room, present, potentially significant, requiring no immediate action. At the end of the session, the formal motions. The Joint Protection Declaration from the Veela Nation and Goblin Nation was entered into the Wisengamot record, which required only a simple majority to formalize, and achieved it, 61 to 47, with Bones leading the affirmative and Fudge attempting to delay proceedings and failing. The declaration was now part of the official record. It was real. The proxy vote review, a formal audit of the 7 flagged sessions, was referred to a select committee, which was weaker than Harry had wanted but stronger than Dumbledore's allies had tried to negotiate it down to. The matter of Sirius Black's imprisonment without trial was referred to the DMLE for review, Madame Bones noting that this was squarely within her jurisdiction and she intended to exercise it personally. Dumbledore, throughout the motions, voted. He used his own seats, he had seats of his own, legitimate ones, and he used them with the discipline of someone who knows when a battle is being lost and is already positioning for the next one. He did not attempt to block the protection declaration. He voted against the proxy audit and lost. He abstained on Sirius Black. Harry watched him abstain and filed it away. When the session closed, the chamber emptied with the specific purposeful speed of people who had things to do with what they'd just heard, and Harry sat in his seats and let the room clear around him and thought. Ragnarok appeared at his shoulder. Well, he said. Bones will move fast on Sirius, Harry said. Within the week, I'd estimate. She's thorough. Dumbledore will try to complicate the proxy audit. He'll find the committee less manageable than he expects, Ragnock said. 2 of the 5 members owe him nothing and have been waiting for an opportunity like this for years. Bones recommended them personally. He paused. You noticed she positioned herself on this issue the moment the documentation landed on her seat. She was already suspicious, Harry said. The documentation confirmed what she'd been thinking. He looked at the empty Chief Warlock's chair. He's not going to stop. No, Ragnock agreed. He's going to recalibrate and try something different. What will he try? He'll try to make this about you, Ragnock said. Not about what he did. About what you are. Your age. Your judgment. Whether the non-human nations have inappropriate influence over a minor. He'll try to make the protection declarations look like political interference rather than protection. He'll need someone to push that argument publicly, Harry said. He has people who will. Ragnock glanced at the 4th tier, now empty. Several of them were sitting up there. Harry nodded slowly. Malfoy didn't speak. No, Ragnock said. That's more worrying than if he had. Ragnock looked at him. Yes, he said. It is. They took the private Gringotts entrance back to the lower corridors, the 5 of them, Harry, Maeve, Ragnock, Griphook, and Ash, and the debrief happened at a table in the records room where it had started, which felt appropriate. What he said about the protections, Harry said, once they were seated. His argument that the modifications were protective rather than controlling. Will anyone believe that? Some will want to, Maeve said. Not because they're foolish. Because Dumbledore has been a fixture of British wizarding life for 50 years, and admitting that he did this is also admitting that everyone who trusted him was wrong too. That's their problem, Harry said. It is, Maeve agreed. But it will make them slower than they should be. People protect the things they've invested in, and a lot of people in that room have invested a great deal in believing Albus Dumbledore is exactly who he presents himself as. Harry considered this. Bones didn't. Bones is exceptional. She's been exceptional for 20 years and has the career it produces. Maeve paused. She'll be useful. Don't push her further than she chooses to go, she's an ally, not an instrument. I know the difference, Harry said. I know you do. Maeve looked at him steadily. You did well today. Better than well. The documentation did the work, Harry said. No, Maeve said. You did the work. The documentation was the evidence. The work was knowing exactly how to present it, in that room, in that order, knowing when to push and when to let silence do more than words would. She paused. You practiced for 2 days and you read everything I gave you and you walked in there and you didn't let him rattle you once. Harry was quiet for a moment. The something young that sometimes appeared beneath his surface appeared now, briefly. He's very good, Harry said. At the warmth thing. I understand why people believe it. Yes, Maeve said. I felt it too. For about a second. He looked at the table. When he said my name. Before I remembered the will. That's not a weakness, Maeve said. Being affected by it means you understand why it works. People who aren't affected at all can't see it for what it is. Harry looked at her. Then he nodded, and moved on. The committee, he said. How long for the proxy audit results? 2 weeks minimum, Ragnock said. 4 is more likely. And Sirius? Bones will move as fast as the law allows. If she finds what I think she'll find, Ragnock paused. There was no trial. There is no trial record. The Ministry's case rests entirely on a confession that Sirius Black gave on the night of his arrest, which was extracted without legal counsel present and under conditions that, he paused again. Which may not hold up to scrutiny. He's been in Azkaban for 9 years, Harry said quietly. For something he might not have done. That is the other thing Dumbledore will have to answer for, Ragnock said. Whether or not he was directly responsible for the arrest, he was in a position to review the case and raise questions, and he did not. Harry sat with that for a moment. Outside, London continued its business, entirely unaware. Somewhere in the North Atlantic, Azkaban sat in its cold, and Sirius Black sat in it, and Harry couldn't fix that today, but today had laid the ground for fixing it, and that would have to be enough. Right, he said, and stood up. I need to write to Madame Bones. Not through official channels, a direct letter, offering the Gringotts copy of the will and the arrest record analysis as supporting material for her review. She'll appreciate the directness, Maeve said. Also, he looked at Ragnock. The soul fragment. The room's energy shifted. The Gringotts assessment identified it, Ragnock said carefully. It's containment. But for removal, the expertise required is specific, Harry said. Yes. Who has it? There are perhaps 3 people alive with the knowledge and skill to remove a soul fragment cleanly, Ragnock said. None of them are people who would be easily approachable. Tell me their names, Harry said. Ragnock looked at him. You're going to want to approach them before you're ready. Tell me their names and let me decide when I'm ready. A pause. Then Ragnock told him. Harry memorized them without writing anything down and filed them in the same place he'd filed Dumbledore's letter and the contents of his parents' will and the expression on Dumbledore's face in the half-second before the smoothing happened. One more thing, Harry said. He looked at Maeve. Dumbledore called this political interference by non-human nations. He'll use that framing. We need to be ahead of it. How? Maeve asked. The Joint Protection Declaration is in the record, Harry said. But protection declarations are reactive, they respond to something happening. What I need is something proactive. Something that puts the relationship between myself and both nations on my terms rather than as a response to Dumbledore's framing. He thought for a moment. Is there a formal alliance mechanism? Something that goes beyond protection? Something with treaty weight? Maeve was looking at him with the complicated expression. There is, she said. A pact heir can enter formal alliance with a non-human nation under the same sovereign entity provisions that give you Wizengamot standing. It would require both nations' formal agreement and a witnessed compact. Would you agree to it? Harry looked between her and Ragnock. A silence. The kind with weight. Yes, Ragnock said. Yes, Maeve said. Then let's write the compact, Harry said. Before Dumbledore finds his next angle. He sat back down, and Griphook produced blank parchment, and they began. Outside the records room, in the amberlit corridors of Gringotts, Harry's lineage tree still glowed in the inheritance chamber, gold-green, impatient, waiting. Chapter 5, Old Debts. Sharp Edges. The letter arrived at Hermione Granger's house on a Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after Harry Potter's name had started appearing in the Daily Prophet with the specific frequency reserved for things the Ministry wanted to control the narrative of and was failing to. She had been following the stories with the kind of focused attention she brought to everything, cutting them out, cross-referencing the legal claims with the library books she'd been quietly accumulating since she got her Hogwarts letter, building a picture from the gaps between what the Prophet was saying and what it was conspicuously not saying. The Prophet said Gringotts and the Veela nation had acted improperly. The Prophet said the boy was being manipulated. The Prophet said Dumbledore was concerned. The Prophet did not, she'd noticed, actually contest any of the documented claims, which was the specific absence that told her the most. The letter was not from the Prophet. It was delivered by a school owl, Hogwarts livery, which was how she recognized it before she opened it, and it was brief and signed by Professor McGonagall, and it said, in terms that were courteous but carried a specific gravity beneath the courtesy, that it would be very helpful if Hermione and her parents could come to Hogwarts at their earliest convenience to discuss her upcoming enrollment and some related matters of importance. Her parents agreed, because they were the kind of people who agreed to things like this, and Hermione packed her notes on the Harry Potter situation because she was the kind of person who packed her notes. Hogwarts in late September had the quality of a place getting ready for something, the grounds maintaining their grandeur with the particular intensity of a stage being set. McGonagall met them at the entrance hall, brisk and precise and doing the specific teacher thing where warmth and seriousness occupied the same expression without contradicting each other. She showed Hermione's parents to a sitting room with tea. She took Hermione to a different room. It was a small office, not McGonagall's office, somewhere else, higher in the castle, with a window overlooking the lake. There was someone already in it. Dumbledore stood when she came in. He did it with the natural courtesy of someone who was accustomed to commanding rooms and chose to express this through graciousness rather than presence. The standing was a gesture, a calibrated one, designed to make the person being stood for feel significant rather than managed. Hermione noticed this and then felt slightly embarrassed for noticing it about the most respected wizard in Britain. "Miss Granger," he said warmly. "Please, sit. I've been looking forward to meeting you." She sat. McGonagall took a chair by the door. Dumbledore settled across from Hermione with the unhurried quality of someone who had all the time in the world and was choosing to spend it here. "Your academic record is extraordinary," he said. "Even by Hogwarts standards, which are not inconsiderable. I understand you've already read most of your first-year texts." "And some second-year," Hermione said. "And I've been reading about wizarding law. Independently." A slight pause. "Have you?" he said, with warm interest. "The Prophet's coverage of the Harry Potter situation has been," she stopped. She had told herself to be careful, had practiced being careful, had decided that whatever she thought she knew it would be foolish to lead with it in front of Albus Dumbledore. But the warm interest and the practiced graciousness and the specific shape of being handled were all present and she found she didn't like the feeling. "Incomplete," she said. "I see." He looked at her for a moment, and the warm interest acquired a quality she couldn't quite name, a focusing, a slight increase in attention, the way a spotlight adjusts. "I expect that's part of what I'd like to discuss with you today. You'll be starting at Hogwarts in a few days. You'll meet Harry Potter, he's enrolled, we expect him to begin with his year, and you'll form your own impressions. I only wanted to offer some context beforehand." "What context?" "Harry is a remarkable boy," Dumbledore said. "Remarkable and, currently, in a situation that, despite the best efforts of those around him, has given him access to a great deal of information that he is perhaps not yet equipped to fully assess." He folded his hands. "He is 10 years old. He has been in the company of the Goblin Nation and the Veela court for 3 weeks, both of whom have legitimate but specific interests in the outcome of his legal situation. I would want any friend of his, any good friend, a thoughtful, intelligent friend, to be aware of that context." Hermione looked at him. She looked at McGonagall, who was looking at the window. She looked back at Dumbledore. "You're asking me to watch him," she said. "And report to you." The warmth didn't falter. "I'm asking you to be a good friend to a boy who needs one," he said. "Friends share things with the people who care about them." Hermione was 11. She had never been to a wizarding school. She had never met a Dark Lord or a Veela Queen or a Goblin Bank Chief. She had met Albus Dumbledore approximately 4 minutes ago. She was aware, sitting in that chair, that she was being managed, and she was also aware that she might be wrong about that, and the combination of those two awarenesses was deeply uncomfortable. She said, "I'll have to think about it," which was not yes and was not no, and Dumbledore accepted it with a gracious nod that meant he was going to treat it as yes. McGonagall walked her back to her parents' sitting room and, in the corridor outside it, stopped and looked at her. "Miss Granger," she said. There was something precise in her expression, controlled, but there. "You are an exceptionally perceptive young woman." Hermione looked at her. "Professor, I wasn't in that room to provide context," McGonagall said, quietly. "I was there because I insisted on being. Because I am the head of the house you will likely be sorted into and I have a responsibility to my students that I take seriously." She held Hermione's eyes. "Look at the documentation. The Gringotts documentation," it's a matter of public record. It was filed with the Wiesengemot and the press copy is available from the clerk's office. Read it before you form any opinions. She opened the sitting room door for Hermione and resumed her professional expression and did not say anything else. Hermione requested the documentation from the Wiesengemot clerk's office the next day. It cost 2 nuts, which her parents paid with bemusement, and it arrived in a package that was significantly thicker than she'd expected. She read it in one sitting. Then she read it again. Then she spent 3 hours cross-referencing the legal claims against the wizarding law texts she'd been accumulating, and at the end of those 3 hours she sat at her desk and looked at the evidence of what had been done to a boy she hadn't met yet and felt a specific kind of cold clarity that she recognized as the feeling she got when she stopped pretending she wasn't sure about something she was sure about. She did not write to Dumbledore. She started a different letter. She wasn't certain who to address it to. Harry Potter was in the news but his correspondence address was not, so she addressed it to Ragnarok, High Chief, Gringotts Bank, and explained who she was and that she had read the documentation and had some questions and was starting Hogwarts in 4 days and thought it might be relevant for Harry to know that Dumbledore had tried to recruit her as an informant before she'd even arrived at school. She was not entirely sure the letter would reach anyone. She sealed it and sent it with her family's post owl and went to bed. The reply came in 6 hours. Not from Ragnarok. From Harry. The handwriting was still finding its shape, she'd learn later that he'd barely been allowed to practice, but the letter itself was not the letter of someone uncertain about what they were doing. Hermione, thank you for telling me. That's exactly the kind of thing I needed to know. Ragnarok says your documentation analysis in your letter was accurate, which coming from Ragnarok means you should probably go into law. He tried the same warm routine on you that he uses on everyone. The fact that you noticed it and told me rather than playing along says something good about you. I'll see you at Hogwarts. Don't let anyone sort you into anything you don't choose. Harry P.S. The questions you had about the proxy vote mechanism in Section 4. The answer is yes, it's as illegal as it looks. Griphook is writing a separate note about it. Griphook's note was thorough, precise, and referenced 4 separate statutes. Hermione read it twice and decided she liked Goblins. Hogwarts on the 1st of October had the quality Hermione had been imagining since she got her letter, a real magic she was smart enough to recognize was separate from charm and enchantment, something in the stone and the age of it, the particular feeling of a place that had been used for learning for 1,000 years and had absorbed something of the intention. She would have liked to experience this feeling without also experiencing the fact that she was being watched. It was subtle. She almost missed it. But she'd spent 3 weeks reading about surveillance magic and Dumbledore's methods, and she noticed the way the cat on the second-floor corridor held very still when she passed, and the way the portrait nearest the Gryffindor common room always seemed to be facing outward, and the way Professor Quirrell, who taught defense and had a stammer that she found unconvincing, was always nearby when Harry was in a public space. Harry noticed all of it too. She found this out on the second day, when she sat across from him in the library and he looked up from the book he was reading and said, without preamble, Quirrell is working for someone. Not Dumbledore. Someone else. She looked at him. She had been prepared, from his letter and from the documentation, not to expect an ordinary 10-year-old. She had not been entirely prepared for this. He looked ordinary, superficially. The glasses. The messy hair. The robes that fit properly now but were the kind of proper that was recently acquired rather than habitual. He had been in the news constantly for 3 weeks and he'd walked into the Great Hall on sorting night with the specific quality of someone who had decided the room would adjust to him rather than the other way around, and the room had, largely, adjusted. How do you know? She asked. His magical signature doesn't match his stammer, Harry said. He's performing nervous. The magic is perfectly controlled underneath it. He turned a page. Ragnarok has people looking into it. And you're telling me because you're going to notice eventually and I'd rather you know what you're looking at when you do. He looked up from the book again. Also because Dumbledore's plan was to use you to watch me, which means he knows you're perceptive, which means you're actually useful to have aware of things rather than kept away from them. Hermione considered this. That's a very pragmatic way to make a friend. It's an honest one, he said. I'm not going to pretend I don't notice that you being informed is strategically useful to me. But I'm also not going to pretend that's the only reason. He looked back at his book. You told me about Dumbledore before we'd met. You didn't have to do that. She was quiet for a moment. The documentation, she said. It's real, isn't it? All of it. Every word. 28, she said, the way she'd said it alone in her room after the second reading. 28, Harry confirmed. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she opened her own book and started reading. After a minute she said, without looking up, the cat on the second-floor corridor. It's a Animagus. McGonagall's, I think, based on the markings. Harry looked at her. You noticed that this morning? I noticed the stillness. Cats don't hold still like that unless they're watching something specific. He smiled. She hadn't seen him smile before, it was a quick thing, genuine, changing his whole face briefly before settling back into focused. Good, he said. Is McGonagall watching for Dumbledore or against him? Against, Harry said. She's been against for a while, I think, but she's still inside the system. She's being careful. He paused. She told you to read the documentation. Yes. Then she made her choice when she said that. She just hasn't announced it yet. Hermione turned another page. What are we doing about Quirrell? Watching for now, Harry said. Ragnarok wants more information before we move. The soul fragment on my scar resonates when Quirrell is nearby, which is, he stopped. Hermione looked at him. The documentation had included the soul fragment. She'd read it and had thoughts. It resonates how? Like a tuning fork, Harry said. Two of the same thing, near each other. He said it flatly, the way he said things he'd already processed and filed. Which means whatever is wearing Quirrell is related to Voldemort. Possibly the rest of what the fragment in my scar came from. The library was quiet around them, afternoon light through high windows, the smell of old paper and wax. Harry, Hermione said carefully. I know, he said. The soul fragment, I know, he said again. There are 3 people in the world who can remove it. Ragnarok is in contact with one of them. His voice was level. We're handling it. She looked at him, this boy who had been carrying a fragment of the darkest wizard in a century in his forehead for 10 years, who had found out about it 3 weeks ago, and who was sitting in the Hogwarts library discussing it with the same focused pragmatism he brought to proxy vote mechanisms and treaty law. She thought about the cold clarity she'd felt reading the documentation and recognized it in him as something structural, not distance, not absence of feeling, but feelings that had been through something and come out organized on the other side. She went back to her book. After a moment he said, what did you think of the sorting? I thought the hat was going to argue with me, she said. He laughed, actually laughed, short and surprised. What did it say? It said I was the most Ravenclaw Gryffindor it had met in 40 years and that the choice was mine and that it had opinions about my future it wasn't allowed to share. She paused. You. It wanted Slytherin, Harry said. I told it no. Just no. It made its case. I made mine. Mine was better. He glanced up. It mentioned the Pactair lineage. Said the last one in Gryffindor was, it used the word legendary, which was either a good sign or a warning, not sure which. Probably both, Hermione said. Probably both, he agreed. The Malfoy move came 3 weeks into term, which was faster than Ragnarok had expected and in a form that none of them had anticipated precisely, though Harry had anticipated the shape of it. It came through the Proxy Audit Committee. Specifically through a document, submitted anonymously to the committee and to the Prophet simultaneously, that claimed the Gringotts signature analysis methodology was fundamentally flawed and that independent testing had produced inconsistent results when attempting to reproduce the attribution of the 8 modifications to Dumbledore's signature. The document was technically sophisticated. It cited 4 academic papers, 2 of which were real and 2 of which, Griphook discovered in under 3 hours, didn't exist. The methodology critique was accurate in its premise and wrong in its application in ways that would take a non-expert time to untangle. It was designed to create doubt, not to convince, and doubt was what it needed because the committee was already moving toward findings that Lucius Malfoy could not allow. Harry read the document that evening in the Gringotts conference room, summoned from Hogwarts by a terse note from Ragnarok that said only Malfoy has moved, come tonight, bring Granger if she's useful. The fake citations are the vulnerability, Hermione said, 10 minutes after being shown the document. She was cross-referencing against a bibliography index Griphook had produced. If we can demonstrate they don't exist, the entire document is inadmissible. You can't submit fabricated academic work to the Wiesengemot without it constituting fraud. We can demonstrate it, Griphook said. We already have. Then why aren't we filing the counter-evidence immediately? Harry asked. Because if we file immediately, Malfoy knows his document was compromised within 3 hours of submission, Ragnarok said. He was standing at the window with his arms folded, looking out at nighttime Diagon Alley. And he'll know we have someone monitoring the committee's incoming documentation. Which we do, Harry said. Which we do, Ragnarok confirmed. And which is legal under the treaty's transparency provisions but which I would prefer Malfoy not know the extent of. He turned from the window. We wait. We file the counter-evidence at exactly the moment that maximizes its impact and minimizes Malfoy's ability to adjust. Harry nodded. When? Committee convenes for deliberation in 8 days. We file on day 7. Ragnarok looked at him. In the meantime, we need to know who wrote the document. It wasn't Malfoy. It's academically detailed enough that it required someone with genuine expertise in magical signature analysis. A bribed researcher, Hermione said. Or a coerced one, Harry said. He was reading the document again. The 2 real citations, the actual papers. Are they from the same author? Griphook checked. Yes. A Madame Celestine Voss. She holds the chair in magical forensics at the European Academy of Advanced Magic. And is she the kind of person who'd fabricate citations willingly? A pause. Griphook and Ragnarok exchanged a look. Her academic reputation suggests not, Griphook said slowly. Then she was coerced, Harry said. Or her work was used without her knowledge and the fake citations were added afterward. He looked at Ragnarok. Can you reach her? Within the day. Do it. If her work was used without her consent, she's a witness, not a conspirator. And she'll be angrier about the fake citations than we are. He set the document down. What else? Ragnarok reached into the document case and produced a second piece of paper. This arrived separately. At the Veela court, not here. He looked at Harry steadily. It's addressed to you. Harry took it. The handwriting was not Dumbledore's, he knew Dumbledore's now, and it was not ministry formal. It was the handwriting of someone writing in controlled urgency, the letters slightly pressed, the pen lifted sharply at the end of words. Mr. Potter, I don't know if this reaches you. I was told you had ways of receiving correspondence that bypassed normal channels and I'm hoping that's true. My name is Celestine Voss. 2 weeks ago I was approached by a representative of Lucius Malfoy and offered a substantial sum to produce a critique of Gringotts' signature analysis methodology. I refused. This week I received a document in the post that was attributed to me and contained my name and my work alongside citations I did not write and did not check. I don't know how to fight this from where I am. I don't know the right people. But I know what my own work says and I know what they added to it and I know that what they added is false. If you want a witness, I'll testify. I want the record to be correct. Celestine Voss. Harry read it twice, then passed it to Hermione, who read it and passed it to Ragnarok, who had clearly already read it given the way he accepted it back without expression. She came to us before we went to her, Harry said. Yes, Ragnock said. Malfoy's people approached her 2 weeks ago, Harry said. He started building this the day after the Wisengamot session. He's been planning this for a month. He's thorough, Ragnock said. It's one of his more useful qualities from an opponent assessment standpoint. Harry looked at Voss's letter. Then at Ragnock. Write to her tonight. Bring her in, full protection, Gringotts sovereign territory, same provisions as my own account status if you can extend them. He paused. She wrote this knowing Malfoy might intercept it. She's not timid. No, Ragnock agreed. Good. Harry stood up. He looked at Hermione. I need you to write the counterbrief. The one that demolishes the fake citations and presents Voss's testimony. You're the most thorough person I know and you read faster than anyone on our legal team. Hermione looked at him. I'm a first-year student. Who correctly identified Animagus surveillance on her second day and whose legal analysis Ragnock called accurate, Harry said. The brief needs to be airtight and it needs to be clear enough that every committee member can follow it on a single read. You can do that. She looked at the document. She looked at the window. She looked back at Harry. I'll need all the relevant statutes, she said. Griphook, Harry said. Griphook was already assembling the stack. Celestine Voss arrived at Gringotts 4 days later, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with the expression of someone who had spent a career being precise and had found one reason too many recently to be furious about imprecision. She shook Harry's hand with both of hers, briefly and firmly, and said, Tell me where to sign. Harry told her. She signed. Griphook witnessed. The document they sent out, she said, settling at the conference table with Hermione's counterbrief in front of her, they used my methodology section almost verbatim. It's actually a good methodology section, I wrote it over 2 years. What they added were the conclusions and the fake citations to give the conclusions apparent academic weight. She looked up. Whoever they paid to write the additional sections understood signature analysis well enough to write plausibly but not well enough to know where my actual work would contradict them. She pointed to a paragraph. Here. They claim variance in the attribution threshold. My own published data from 1987 directly contradicts this claim and they cited that paper in section 2. She almost smiled, and the almost was the cold kind. They cited the paper that disproves their own argument. Hermione looked at the paragraph she was pointing to. I caught that too, she said. Voss looked at her. How old are you? 11, Hermione said. Voss looked at Harry. How old are you? 10, Harry said. Voss looked at Ragnock. Where did you find these children? One came with a ley line survey, Ragnock said. The other came by post. Voss absorbed this. Right, she said, and turned back to the brief. Day 7. The counterbrief, Voss's witness statement, the fraudulent citation analysis, and a formal complaint against Lucius Malfoy for submission of fabricated academic evidence to a Wisengamot committee landed simultaneously on every committee member's desk, the Prophet's editorial desk, and the Wisengamot clerk's permanent record. The timing was Ragnock's. He had chosen the moment with the precision of someone who had been doing this for a very long time and had learned that the specific hour of delivery mattered as much as the content. 7 in the morning, before the committee convened, while the Prophet's morning run was already locked in and the editor would have to make a decision about whether to run the counter-story or explain why they hadn't. The Prophet ran it. Not because they wanted to. Because Voss was a named academic with an unimpeachable record and the fraudulent citations were verifiable and the paper they'd already run on the Malfoy document had created a responsibility to correct the record. The headline was not what Harry would have chosen, Gringotts methodology dispute takes sharp turn, but the content was accurate and the content was what mattered. Lucius Malfoy's formal response arrived at Gringotts by afternoon. Harry read it in the conference room. It was perfectly worded. It expressed deep regret that documents submitted in good faith had contained errors, attributed the errors to a third-party consultant Malfoy had no reason to distrust, and noted that Malfoy himself had no involvement in the specific academic analysis. It was a clean severance, cutting the consultant loose, taking no responsibility, maintaining complete plausible deniability. He burned his own person, Hermione said. He always planned to, Harry said. The consultant was expendable. The document was a delay tactic. Even with Voss's testimony, the committee deliberation has been pushed back by a week. 1 week, Hermione said. That's what this bought him. A week. A week is time, Harry said. He's building something with it. We just don't know what yet. He looked at the letter. He's not Dumbledore. Dumbledore thinks in decades. Malfoy thinks in outcomes, he wants a specific result and he's working backward from it. He set the letter down. What result does he want most? For the proxy audit to find in Dumbledore's favor, Hermione said. He doesn't care about Dumbledore, Harry said. He cares about the Wizengamot seats. If the audit validates the proxy votes, it validates decisions made during those 9 years, decisions that benefited certain people. He looked at Ragnarok. Pull the proxy vote records again. Specifically look for legislation that benefited the Malfoy family financially. Griphook was already moving. There's going to be something, Harry said. Not a prediction. A statement. He's not spending this much effort on defense if he doesn't have something to lose. 3 hours later Griphook came back with 6 pieces of legislation. 2 of them, passed by thin majorities in 1986 and 1988, had directly benefited a family of businesses the Malfoy estate held through various holding structures. Both votes would have failed without Harry's 5 proxied seats. Harry looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he looked at Ragnarok. Can I call a press address? Ragnarok looked back at him. You want to do this publicly? I want to do this publicly, with documentation, before Malfoy's week is up. Harry looked at the numbers again. He made money with my vote. Votes I never cast, on legislation I never read, that I never had the choice to make. And the money is sitting in his accounts right now. He was quiet for a moment. I want that on record. I want every member of the Wizengamot to know exactly what their colleague has been profiting from and how. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Then he almost smiled, which was the expression that meant Harry had arrived somewhere Ragnarok had been waiting for him to arrive. I'll have the press briefing arranged for tomorrow morning, he said. I want Voss there, Harry said. As the witness on the documentation fraud. And Madame Bones, if she'll come, her DMLE review is directly related to one of those 1,986 votes. He paused. And I want the Wizengamot committee chair notified 1 hour before the press briefing starts. Not before. 1 hour. Why 1 hour? Hermione asked. Long enough that he can't claim he wasn't informed, Harry said. Not long enough to prepare a response. Hermione looked at him. She had a very particular expression she used when Harry did something that she found both tactically admirable and personally disconcerting, which was an expression she'd been using with increasing frequency. You know, she said, most 10-year-olds are thinking about Quidditch. I'm thinking about Quidditch, Harry said. Just not right now. You haven't even been to a match. I've been busy. He looked at her. Write the press briefing document. Same format as the counterbrief, clear, sequential, fully cited. Obviously, she said, and pulled the parchment toward her. The press briefing was held in the Gringotts public hall, cleared of its morning customers, with the bank's formal banking chamber as backdrop, stone and gold and the specific gravitas of an institution that had been operating without interruption since the Middle Ages. 15 reporters attended, which was every accredited reporter at every wizarding publication in Britain plus 2 from the continent who Griphook had, with quiet efficiency, ensured received invitations. Harry stood at the front. Maeve at his left, Ragnarok at his right. Voss behind them, steady and precise. Madam Bones had come, she'd replied to the invitation within the hour, accepting without conditions, and she stood in the front row of the press section with her monocle and her documentation folder and the specific expression of a law enforcement officer who has been watching something build for a long time and is glad it's finally building in front of witnesses. Harry had prepared a statement. He gave it without notes, because he'd memorized it and because reading from a paper in front of 15 reporters was not the impression he was trying to create. He laid out the Malfoy documentation fraud, briefly, factually, with citations to Voss's testimony and the fraudulent citations analysis. He laid out the 6 pieces of benefiting legislation and the financial trail. He laid out the mathematical certainty that without his proxied seats, 2 votes would have gone differently and the Malfoy estate would be 2 significant pieces of legislation lighter. He spoke for 11 minutes. Then he said, "I'm not calling for anything dramatic. I'm presenting facts. The committee has the documents. The committee will make its findings. What I am saying, clearly and on record, is that the attempt to delay those findings through a fabricated academic document was not a mistake or a misunderstanding, it was a calculated attempt to interfere with a legitimate legal process, and the person who authorized it had a direct financial interest in the outcome." He paused. The wizarding world has allowed a great deal to happen behind closed doors for a very long time. I'm not interested in closed doors. 3 reporters spoke at once. He took their questions one by one, in order, with the patience and precision of someone who had read every press briefing in the Prophet's archives going back 15 years and knew exactly what questions were coming. Hermione had helped him prepare for the questions. She had thought of several he hadn't. He was answering the 4th question when the doors opened and Lucius Malfoy walked in. The room stilled. Malfoy came in alone, no entourage, which was itself a statement, in robes that were the color of authority without being official, the grey of old money rather than the black of state power. He was looking at Harry with the cold, calculating expression Harry had been seeing since the Wisengamot session, and there was something additional in it today. Not quite anger. Something that had been assessment and was becoming something more active. "Mr. Potter," Malfoy said. His voice was smooth, unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years in rooms like this and considered them his natural environment. An impressive performance. "I wasn't performing," Harry said. "I was briefing the press. A distinction I'm sure you appreciate the nuance of." Malfoy moved to the edge of the press area, which put him sideways to Harry, not confrontational, not deferential, the position of someone who is comfortable and intends to demonstrate it. "I came to say publicly that any irregularities in the documentation submitted to the committee were the result of a third party acting beyond their brief, and that I consider the matter resolved." "You're saying that in front of 15 reporters at my press briefing," Harry said. "I thought the transparency you advocate warranted it," Malfoy said, with a smile that was entirely constructed. "Then you'll be willing to put that on sworn record before the committee," Harry said. "That you had no knowledge of the fabricated citations and that the submission was entirely the responsibility of the consultant." He held Malfoy's eyes. "Under oath, with a Veritaserum option." The smile held for exactly the amount of time it took Malfoy to decide whether refusing in public was worse than accepting in public. "Of course," Malfoy said. "Good," Harry said. "I'll let the committee chair know to expect your deposition. End of week, I think, given the delay your document already caused, I'm sure the committee will appreciate the urgency." Malfoy looked at him. The cold calculating expression had acquired a very slight additional quality, the adjustment of someone recalibrating for an opponent who keeps not behaving as expected. "You're 10 years old," he said. "So people keep telling me," Harry said. "Was there anything else?" Malfoy looked at him for another moment. Then at Maeve, who was watching him with the specific expression she used for people she found professionally interesting and personally contemptible. Then at Ragnarok, who was watching him with no expression at all, which was considerably more unsettling. "No," Malfoy said, "I believe that covers it," and he left the way he'd come, which was smoothly and without apparent haste, and the room watched him go and then turned back to Harry with the collective energy of 15 reporters who had just watched something worth writing about. Harry took the next question. Hermione, standing at the back of the press section, she had insisted on being present but had equally insisted on not being at the front, on the grounds that this was Harry's public position and she didn't need to be in it to be useful to it, watched him handle the remaining questions with the same focused directness he brought to everything, and thought about the letter he'd written before they'd met, and the documentation she'd read in her bedroom, and the Dumbledore conversation she'd walked out of without committing to anything. She had made her choice when she posted that first letter to Gringotts. She made it again, watching Harry stand in the gold-lit banking chamber at 10 years old and refuse to be anything other than exactly what he was. She was glad she'd made it. The committee findings came 6 days later, 2 weeks after the session where Harry had first stood on the Wizengamot floor and laid it all out. The findings confirmed the proxy vote irregularities, found 3 of the 7 flagged votes to constitute an actionable conflict of interest, and referred the matter for formal censure proceedings against Dumbledore as Chief Warlock. Censure proceedings. Not removal. Not prosecution. The committee had gone as far as it could go under its own mandate. Harry read the findings. He noted what they said and what they stopped short of saying. "It's not enough," Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. "Not yet," Harry said. He wrote to Madame Bones. Ragnarok had a meeting with the Wizengamot's Independent Oversight Office, which was a body that most people had forgotten existed because it had not been activated in 30 years. Maeve filed 2 additional compact provisions that her court archivists had found in documents that hadn't been touched since 1923. The machinery of proper process, once set in motion, was a slow and specific thing. But it was moving, and every week it moved. Dumbledore's architecture became harder to maintain and Harry's became harder to stop. Outside Hogwarts that evening, in the last of the autumn light, the ground smelled of old wood and turning leaves. Harry sat by the lake. The animals had been finding him since the first day, a calculated annoyance to the surveillance, and there was a family of ducks currently treating him as a fixed geographic feature, and felt the ley line below the grounds, the deep one, the one the school was built over, clean and strong and running all the way south to Hampshire and beyond. He was not finished. He knew that with the clarity he brought to everything. But the ground was different now from what it had been, and the difference was permanent, and nobody, not Dumbledore, not Malfoy, not the Ministry and its careful management of inconvenient truths, could put the documentation back in the vault or the bindings back in place or the knowledge back behind the walls it had been kept behind. The ducks quacked. Harry looked at them. "I know," he said, and they settled. Chapter 6, Unbound. The censure hearing was scheduled for the 14th of December, which gave Dumbledore 6 weeks to work with and gave Harry 6 weeks to make sure those 6 weeks didn't matter. He used them well. The soul fragment situation resolved itself first, which was not the order anyone had planned for but was the order it happened in, and it happened on a Tuesday in November when Harry was in the Ollery writing letters and felt the resonance in his scar spike sharply and then cut off, which told him Quirrell was either leaving the castle or doing something significant in it. He went to find out which. The third-floor corridor had been off-limits since September, with the specific emphasis of a prohibition designed to make curious 11-year-olds more rather than less curious. Harry had been curious since the first week but had been waiting for the right conditions, and the spike and cutoff felt like the right conditions. He brought Hermione because she was already in the corridor when he got there, which meant she'd felt something too. She hadn't explained this yet, the way she sometimes registered magical events slightly ahead of direct observation, and Harry had filed it under things to ask about later. The door to the third-floor restricted section was ajar. They went through it. The room beyond held a trapdoor and a 3-headed dog that looked at Harry and then sat down, which was the speaker inheritance doing something useful in a practical situation for the first time. Harry told it, in the particular way that wasn't words exactly but that the dog understood, to stay, and it stayed. They went through the trapdoor. What was below the trapdoor was a series of obstacles that Harry suspected had been designed by various Hogwarts professors with the specific intent of being dramatic: Devil's Snare, a room full of flying keys, a life-size chess set, a logic puzzle with bottles. The chess set was the worst of it and Hermione solved the bottle puzzle in 4 minutes, and what was at the end of all of it was Quirrell, standing in front of a mirror that reflected Harry's image holding something, which Harry found immediately suspicious because mirrors didn't work that way unless someone had specifically designed them not to. Quirrell turned around. Without the stammer. Without the performance. "I wondered when you'd come down," Quirrell said. His voice was his own now, absent the stammer, and it was a pleasant voice that had the quality of something that had been used to say things it shouldn't for a long time. "I expected you sooner, if I'm honest." "I was waiting," Harry said. "For what?" "For you to come to the mirror," Harry said. "You've been down here twice before without getting what you came for. I figured you'd try again." Quirrell looked at him. Behind the pleasantness of his voice was something older and colder, and Harry felt his scar resonate, not the spike of before but the low harmonic, the tuning fork recognition. "You felt it," Quirrell said. "The connection. You've always felt it." "Yes," Harry said. "Then you know what's sharing your head with you." "I know," Harry said. Quirrell tilted his head. "And you're not afraid?" "Of you?" Harry said. "No." "Of what's in the mirror?" "Of what's in the stone that's in the mirror." Quirrell's expression was doing something Harry couldn't entirely categorize, not the warmth performance he'd been watching all term, something more genuine and therefore more strange. "Of what's in your scar?" "I'm going to deal with all three," Harry said. "But right now I'm dealing with you." Quirrell moved toward him, and the thing that happened next was not the duel Harry had been prepared for. It was faster and stranger than a duel. Quirrell reached for him, and where his hands touched Harry's arms the skin burned, not the burn of injury, the burn of opposing forces, the specific magical friction of a soul fragment meeting the magic of the person it had been partly responsible for creating. Harry stepped back. The burn intensified. "He can't touch me," Harry said, not to Quirrell but out loud, understanding it as he said it. "The inheritance. The packed air lineage. The living magic." Quirrell was looking at his own hands with an expression that was for the first time not performed, genuine shock, the shock of a plan encountering something it hadn't accounted for. He tried again. Harry stood still this time and let the burn happen, and his eyes did the thing they had done in the unbinding room, the deep amber gold, the full surface, sustained this time, and where Quirrell's hands pressed, the living magic responded like a tide coming in. Quirrell's hands were burning. Not Harry. The voice that came from somewhere behind Quirrell's face, from the back of his skull, Harry realized, from whatever had made its home there, was the voice of something that was not Quirrell, thin and cold and very old, and it said, "Impossible," and then it said nothing more because the living magic had reached it and the packed air lineage was exactly what its 800-year-old pact had made it, which was a sovereign and unkillable manifestation of something that had been growing in the earth of Britain since before Hogwarts was built. It took approximately 30 seconds. Quirrell fell. The thing that had been sharing him came apart as it left him, which was not a death but a dispersal, fragmentary, incomplete, driven off rather than destroyed, because Harry was certain you couldn't destroy something this persistent without the soul fragment in his scar being addressed first, and that conversation was scheduled. The stone in the mirror, he looked at it, knowing what it was, knowing what it could do, and then he turned away from it. "Harry," Hermione said, from the door behind him. "The stone needs to be secured," Harry said. "Not by the school. Not by Dumbledore." He looked at her. "Ragnarok. I'll send the owl," she said immediately. He looked at Quirrell, who was breathing, who would survive this, who would wake up without the thing in him and would face, separately, the consequences of having let it in. He didn't feel sorry for Quirrell. He felt something adjacent to sorry, the specific emotion of watching someone make a choice that leads them to a place you wouldn't wish on anyone, and knowing the choice was theirs. He went upstairs and sent the owl himself, because Hermione's owl was faster but his message needed to come from him. He had it done before Dumbledore arrived at the third-floor corridor, which happened approximately 15 minutes after, and by then the message was sent and what it contained was already in motion. The conversation with Dumbledore happened in his office, which Harry had not been to before, and which was full of things that moved and hummed and watched in the particular way of objects that had been listening for a long time. The portraits on the walls were previous headmasters and headmistresses, and they watched Harry with varying expressions as he sat across from Dumbledore, and Harry looked at some of them and they looked away. Dumbledore was controlled. He was always controlled, Harry had learned. The control was the performance, not what was underneath it. What was underneath it, visible in the very slight tightening around his eyes and the specific way his hands were folded, was a man who had gotten to the third-floor corridor and found nothing where he expected to find something, and who was now sitting across from a 10-year-old boy trying to determine how much he knew. "Are you all right?" Dumbledore said. "Fine," Harry said. "What happened downstairs is documented," Harry said. "I've already written to Ragnarok. His team will be here tomorrow to secure the stone." A silence. "The stone is under my care," Dumbledore said. "The stone needs to go somewhere that Voldemort can't reach it," Harry said. "With respect, your track record on that specific task this term has been mixed." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I'm not trying to be unkind. The protection system downstairs was clever. It just didn't account for the professor who designed one of the obstacles being possessed at the time." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "You've known about Quirrell since September?" "Yes." "And you waited?" "Until the right moment," Harry said. "I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I dealt with it." "You might have told me," Dumbledore said. The warmth was still there, layered over everything, but there was something else working underneath it. A reassessment, a recalibration, the look of a man who is used to being the most prepared person in any room and has found he isn't. "I might have," Harry agreed. "But our relationship doesn't have the kind of trust that sharing intelligence requires." "You know why?" The words were simple and direct and not unkind, and they landed exactly where they were meant to. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. The control held. The warmth held. But underneath both of those, something shifted, something Harry had not seen in him before, something that was not tactical. "No," Dumbledore said, very quietly. "I suppose it doesn't." It was not an apology. But it was an acknowledgement, which from Dumbledore in this room was more significant than an apology would have been, because apologies could be performed. Harry nodded. "The stone will be safer at Gringotts. That's not a political move, it's a practical one." He paused. "I'll tell Ragnarok to document the transfer and CC the ministry. Complete transparency." Dumbledore looked at the stone in his hands, which he had retrieved before Harry arrived upstairs. He set it on the desk between them. "I'll arrange the transfer," he said. Harry stood up. "The censure hearing is in 3 weeks, he said. "I don't want to discuss it tonight. But I want you to know that what happens there," he stopped, choosing words. "It's not personal. I know you believe you were protecting me. I know that's not a lie you're telling yourself, you actually believe it." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "But believing it doesn't change what you did. And what you did needs to go on the record." Dumbledore said nothing. "Good night," Harry said. He left the office, and the portraits watched him go, and one of them, a severe-faced woman, 2 portraits from the door who Harry didn't recognize, started clapping slowly, and then stopped when Dumbledore looked at her. The 3 weeks between the third-floor corridor and the censure hearing were the busiest Harry had experienced, which was saying something given the previous 3 months. The Soul Fragment conversation happened on a Saturday in late November, when Ragnarok had arranged for the practitioner he'd contacted, a severe, compact woman named Aldrich who spoke 4 languages and explained things only once and expected you to understand them, to come to Gringotts and do the work. Harry had been prepared for it to be the most difficult thing he'd been through since the unbinding. In the event, it was different from difficult, it was vast and strange and not entirely unpleasant, the way large surgery is said to feel under the right conditions. Aldrich worked with instruments that had no magical equivalent Harry had encountered, and she narrated what she was doing for Maeve's benefit in terms that Harry, lying on the table, could hear and follow. The fragment had been weakened. The third-floor corridor encounter had done that. The living magic had affected it in ways that Aldrich found professionally interesting and noted for her records. What remained was extractable, and she extracted it over the course of 3 hours, and what Harry felt when it left was what he imagined it felt like to remove a splinter you had stopped noticing, the absence of something that had always been there, the sudden clarity of not having to filter a small constant wrongness out of your perception. He sat up when it was done and felt the difference immediately. The scar was still there. It always would be. But the resonance was gone, the harmonic tuning fork recognition was gone, and what replaced it was simply his own magic, clean through to its base, all the way down to the packed air lineage singing its low satisfied note. "Done?" he asked Aldrich. "Done," she said. "Thank you." She looked at him. "Don't thank me," she said. "I have been wanting to do this for 30 years and no one would bring me the case." She started packing her instruments with swift precision. "Thank your goblin friend for finally calling." Harry looked at Ragnarok. Ragnarok looked at Harry with the expression that had not changed significantly since the night in the hallway at Privet Drive, which was the expression of someone who had decided to respect something and had been finding new reasons to continue that decision ever since. "How do you feel?" Ragnarok asked. Harry thought about it. Actually thought, rather than defaulting to fine. "Like the volume's been turned up," he said. "On everything. Not in a bad way. Just, clearer." Ragnarok nodded. "You'll need a week to adjust." "I have 3 weeks until the hearing," Harry said. 2.5, Ragnarok said. "Use them." He used them. He read the censure statutes until he could quote them from memory. He reviewed the committee findings line by line with Hermione, who had developed the habit of finding the 3 things in any document that everyone else would miss and presenting them in order of tactical importance. He had 2 additional meetings with Madame Bones, whose serious black review had produced findings that made her expression do things Harry was now able to read accurately, which meant the findings were significant and she was not yet ready to formally announce them. "When?" he asked her, at the second meeting. She looked at him over her monocle. "The hearing," she said. "I'll have the formal review complete by the hearing. I'll attend as DMLE head and present the findings to the body as a whole." "You're synchronizing with the censure proceedings deliberately," Harry said. "I am doing my job," Bones said, with the specific tone she used when she was doing something tactical and preferred not to name it as such. Harry had learned to appreciate this quality in her, the effectiveness delivered under plausible procedural cover. "Of course," Harry said. The alliance compact between Harry, the Goblin Nation, and the Veela Nation was finalized and witnessed on the 10th of December, 4 days before the hearing, in a ceremony that was formal enough to have legal weight and brief enough not to become symbolic in ways that would invite performance. Ragnarok and Maeve and Harry sat at a table. Griphook and Ash and 2 court archivists witnessed. The compact was signed in 3 languages, English, gobbledygook, and the old script of the Veela court, and it said, plainly, that the 3 parties were bound in alliance by mutual sovereignty and mutual interest, and that what affected one affected all. Harry read it 3 times before signing. Then he signed, and the compact sealed itself with a warmth that was familiar from the unbinding room, the living magic, recognizing the thing being done. "That's permanent," Maeve said. "Good," Harry said. She looked at him. The complicated expression was there, which he had learned was the one that meant she was feeling something she had not allocated space for in her interior architecture and was quietly rebuilding to accommodate it. He had started to recognize it as the expression that was specifically for him, and it did something to the something young that occasionally appeared underneath his surface. "Are you ready for Thursday?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "It will be different from the first session," she said. "The first session you had surprise and documentation. Thursday you'll have documentation and history. People have had 3 months to form positions." "Some of those positions have shifted," Harry said. "Some," she agreed. "Not all." "I don't need all," he said. "I need enough." Fleur, who had come back from France for the compact ceremony and had stayed, because she had decided the Hogwarts Christmas holidays were an excellent time to be in Britain, looked up from the documents she was organizing. "You have enough," she said. Harry looked at her. She had developed a habit of offering assessments without preamble, direct and precisely calibrated, that he found straightforwardly useful and occasionally startling. "You think so?" "I've been watching The Prophet," she said. "The coverage has shifted in the past month. Not the editorial position is still carefully neutral because they're afraid of both sides. But the letters section. The people writing in. The framing of the questions they're asking." She set down her document. 3 months ago the public question was whether you were being manipulated by non-human interests. Now it's whether Dumbledore should resign. She met his eyes. That is a significant movement in public opinion in 12 weeks. "You did that." "We did that," Harry said. "You," she said. "We helped. But you did it." He didn't argue, which he might have done 3 months ago, when accepting that something was his own doing had felt presumptuous. He just nodded, and turned back to the documents, and Fleur went back to organizing, and the compact sat on the table between them warm and real and permanent. The 14th of December was a grey, cold morning with the specific quality of winter in London, not the clean cold of countryside but the damp, pressing cold of a city that is simultaneously too large and too close. Harry dressed in the court robes without assistance, not because he didn't want help but because it had become a ritual, the particular focus of putting on the green and silver and the packed air markings and becoming, consciously and deliberately, what the robes said he was. Hermione handed him his document case at the Gringotts entrance. She had organized it the night before in the order he would need it, with color-coded tabs that she had made at midnight and that were, Harry suspected, coded in a system he would need her to explain but that she would decode instantly under any time pressure. "Green tabs are the censure statutes," she said. "Blue is the proxy documentation. Red is Bones's material," she confirmed this morning she's presenting. She paused. "Yellow is serious." Harry looked at the yellow tabs. There were 4 of them. "She has enough?" he asked. "She has enough," Hermione said. "She told me last night when she sent the final documents. I didn't tell you because you needed to sleep." He looked at her. She looked back with the expression she used when she had made a judgment call she was prepared to defend. "Fair," he said. "I know," she said. Ragnarok appeared at the corridor junction. "The chamber is open," he said. "Early arrivals already. More than the first session." He looked at Harry. "The Prophet has a reporter in the press gallery for the first time in 6 years." "Good," Harry said, and walked forward. The chamber was full in the way it had been for the first session but differently, a different quality of full, denser, the attendance including people who didn't normally come to censure hearings at all. Observers in the gallery, which the first session hadn't had. The press gallery occupied for the first time in 6 years, as Ragnarok had said, with 2 reporters and a photographer whose camera Harry heard click once as he came through the entrance and walked to his seats. He sat. He opened the document case. He looked at the room. Dumbledore was in the Chief Warlock's chair, which he would occupy until the censure proceedings formally decided otherwise, and he had arrived early, which was unusual. Dumbledore had a habit of arriving at exactly the right moment, not early, as though time waited for him. Today he had arrived early and was sitting with his hands folded and his expression carrying the particular quality of someone who has decided on a strategy and is committed to it. Harry looked at him once and noted this and moved his attention to the room. Malfoy was in his usual 4th-tier seat. He had been quiet since the press briefing, quiet in the specific way of someone repositioning rather than retreating, and Harry had spent 2 weeks trying to determine what the repositioning looked like. Today Malfoy had brought a legal aid, which was unusual, and the legal aid had a document case that was significantly fuller than document cases normally were for censure hearings. Harry filed this. Madame Bones was in her seat on the 2nd tier, monocle in place, folder on her lap. She caught Harry's eye when he looked at her and gave him a single, slight nod. The session opened with procedure, as it always did. The clerk read the censure motion, formal language, parliamentary precision, the specific cadence of institutional gravity. The committee chair presented the findings summary, which took 12 minutes and covered the proxy votes, the conflict of interest determinations, and the recommendation for censure. Then Dumbledore was invited to respond. He stood. He came to the center of the floor. He was white-robed again, because Dumbledore understood visual language and white had served him for 50 years, and he stood in the acoustic center and looked up at the chamber with the expression of a man who has made peace with something and is ready to speak from that peace. "I will not contest the committee's findings," he said. The room's ambient noise, low as it was, dropped further. "The proxy votes constitute a conflict of interest. I should have recused myself at the time of appointment and I did not. That is a failure of judgment for which I accept responsibility." He paused, letting the acceptance sit. "The modifications placed on Harry Potter, the 8 bearing my signature, I have explained my reasoning and I maintain that the reasoning was genuine. I maintain that the intention was protective. I acknowledge, fully and on record, that intention does not negate impact, and that the impact on Harry Potter's sovereignty and inheritance was significant and wrong." Another pause. "These are admissions I make because they are true, not because this body's findings leave me no alternative." It was well done. Harry recognized how well done it was, the admission framing everything as self-reflection rather than defeat, the warmth carrying the acknowledgement so that it arrived as wisdom instead of capitulation. People in the upper tiers were nodding. 2 members of the second tier had expressions that suggested they were re-evaluating their prepared remarks. Harry stood up. The clerk looked at him, uncertain of protocol, because the censure procedure did not have a formal provision for the party who'd been harmed to address the chamber directly. "The packed air holds 5 hereditary seats," Ragnock said, from the floor's edge, in the tone he used when he was citing something no one was going to argue with. "Statute 89 provides unlimited floor access. The packed air's right to speak is unrestricted." The clerk nodded. Harry walked to the center. He stood where Dumbledore had been standing 3 minutes ago. "I appreciate the admission," he said. "I do. What he just described happened and he acknowledged it, and that's more than I expected when this started 3 months ago." He looked at the tiers, taking them in. "But I want to be specific about what we're talking about, because I think the language we've been using makes it easier to think about this in the abstract than it is when you look at the details." He opened the blue-tabbed section of his document case. 9 years, he said. From the night my parents died until 3 months ago. During that time, 8 modifications sat in my magic and suppressed my access to my own inheritance, my own power, and my own identity. During that time, 5 of my Wisengamot seats were controlled by the person who placed those modifications, and used to influence 7 significant votes in this body. During that time, I lived in a Muggle household that I was placed in against the explicit instructions of my parents' will, which, he reached for the yellow tab. Stopped. Looked at Madame Bones. Bones stood up. "If I may," she said, to the chamber, with the authority of a department head who has asked permission and expects to receive it. "The DMLE review of the imprisonment of Sirius Black." She opened her folder. Sirius Orion Black was arrested on the 2nd of November 1981 and transported to Azkaban without legal proceedings of any kind. No charge sheet. No hearing. No trial. Under subsection 4 of the Wisengamot Justice Code, any individual imprisoned without trial is entitled to immediate review and release pending formal proceedings. That code provision has been in place for 140 years. The chamber was very still. "There is no trial record," Bones continued, "because there was no trial. There is a confession, extracted on the night of arrest, without counsel, under conditions that do not meet the minimum standards set by the Justice Code for voluntary statement validity. There is nothing else." She closed the folder. "As of this morning I have filed the release order. Sirius Black will be transported from Azkaban to St. Mungo's for medical evaluation within 24 hours. She looked at Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore was Chief Warlock at the time of the arrest. He was the person most positioned, most qualified, and most legally obligated to review the case and raise the absence of proceedings. He did not. Dumbledore said nothing. Harry looked at him. The composure was holding, still, but there was something underneath it now that was different from the recalibration and the adjustment. Something that was just a man who had been measured in specific and public terms and found to have come up short. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you he's evil," Harry said. "I don't believe that. I believe what he said, that the intention was protective. I believe he made choices that seemed right to him and that the rightness of them became, over time, more important than the harm of them." He looked at the chamber. "What I'm saying is that the structure of protection he built required my ignorance to function. It required that I not know who I was, what I held, what my parents wanted, what my godfather's situation was. The protection was real. The cost of the protection was my entire self." He paused. "Nobody asked me if that trade was acceptable. I was an infant and then I was a child in a cupboard under the stairs and no one asked." The chamber absorbed this. "The censure motion," Harry said, "as written, recommends formal censure and a review of the Chief Warlock's ongoing suitability for the position. I support the motion." He paused. "I'd also like this body to consider a separate motion, one that hasn't been filed yet, that I'm asking to file now, under the emergency provisions of the Wizengamot Charter." He looked at the clerk. "A motion to establish an independent oversight committee for all Wizengamot proxy administration, with mandatory transparency requirements, mandatory conflict of interest recusal, and quarterly audit provisions. So that what happened here cannot happen to the next person who doesn't know what they are." He went back to his seat. The chamber moved through its process, the formal speeches, the declarations, the procedural motions. Some of them Harry had anticipated. Several he hadn't. A witch from the fifth tier whom he'd identified as a Dumbledore ally gave a speech that defended Dumbledore's record at length and was heard politely and made no apparent dents. Fudge attempted to delay the Sirius Black release order through a procedural challenge and was overruled by Bones with an efficiency that suggested she had prepared for exactly this attempt. Lucius Malfoy stood and gave a brief, precise speech in favor of the censure motion, which Harry had not anticipated and spent 30 seconds analyzing before arriving at. Malfoy had looked at where the chamber was going and had decided to position himself on the correct side of history while the positioning was still available, and the legal aid document case was the prepared pivot, not a counterattack. He was cutting his losses and protecting his long-term position. It was well executed. Harry found it genuinely impressive in the specific way that a well-executed thing is impressive regardless of who executes it. The votes. Censure motion, passed, 81 to 43. More than the protection declarations. More than the audit referral. 81 members of the Wizengamot had looked at 3 months of documentation and proceedings and landed in the same place. The transparency and oversight motion, filed, seconded by Bones, tabled for next session pending drafting, which was not passage but was survival, and a motion that survived tabling in the Wizengamot had a very high historical rate of eventual passage. The Chief Warlock Suitability Review, referred to a formal committee of 5, to be constituted within the month. Dumbledore, when the votes concluded, stood from the Chief Warlock's chair and came to the floor for the last time in that session and made a brief statement that he would cooperate fully with the suitability review and that he had full confidence in the body's judgment. He said it with the warmth that was always there, and this time the warmth had a quality in it that Harry had not heard before, something tired, underneath it. Not defeated. Just tired. He looked at Harry, once, before he went back to the upper entrance. Harry looked back. It was not a long look and it contained too many things for the chamber to read from the outside. But what Harry saw in Dumbledore's face in that moment was not the composure or the warmth or the recalibration or any of the performed layers. Just the man underneath them, old and very certain he was right and understanding for perhaps the first time that being certain wasn't the same as being correct. Harry nodded at him, once. Dumbledore held his gaze for another moment. Then he turned and went through the upper entrance and the chamber exhaled around him. Outside, on the broad steps leading up from the ministry entrance, the December air hit cold and clear. Harry stood at the top of the steps and breathed it. Maeve came to stand beside him. Ragnarok on the other side. Behind them, Hermione and Fleur, who had come to the gallery even though she had absolutely no formal status in the proceedings, and Ragnarok had had to create a provisional observer category specifically for her, which he had done without comment. Ash stood at the bottom of the steps looking at the street with the professional attention of someone whose job hadn't changed regardless of what happened in the building behind them. Bones confirmed the release order before we came out, Ragnarok said. Sirius Black leaves Azkaban tonight. Harry looked at the street. People moving, the ordinary business of a December afternoon, the smell of roasting chestnuts from somewhere nearby and the specific cold metal smell of the ministry building at their backs. He'll need time, Harry said. At St. Mungo's, then, somewhere. He'll need a lot of time. He has time, Maeve said. And he has the Black Estate, 3 vaults cleared and active as of last month. He has resources. He doesn't know me, Harry said. No, Maeve agreed. But he will. Harry was quiet for a moment, thinking about a man in a cold cell who had been there for 9 years for something he likely hadn't done, placed there by the same mechanisms that had placed 28 bindings on a 1-year-old, and who would wake up tomorrow somewhere else and have to figure out what that meant. I'll write to him, Harry said. When he's well enough. Not before. He paused. Through Bones, she can judge when. Maeve nodded. The Suitability Committee, Harry said to Ragnarok. Dumbledore will cooperate, like he said. He's not going to run. No, Ragnarok agreed. Which means the committee process will take the time it takes and the outcome will be what the evidence supports. Harry looked at the street. That's enough. I don't need him removed in humiliation. I need the record to be correct. Ragnarok looked at him sidelong. Some people would want more. Some people haven't read as much history as I have, Harry said. Martyrs are more powerful than the simply discredited. If Dumbledore leaves power through a legitimate process with his dignity intact, he becomes a cautionary tale. If he's destroyed publicly, he becomes a symbol. He paused. I don't want him to be a symbol. We have enough of those. Fleur, behind him, made the sound she made when she was genuinely surprised by something. Harry had catalogued this sound over 2 months. It was slightly different from the impressed sound and very different from the amused sound, and he turned to look at her. What? He said. Nothing, she said, in a tone that meant the opposite. Fleur. I just think, she said, that you are going to be very annoying to argue with in 10 years. In 10 years you'll be 26, Harry said. Yes, she said. And I'll be 20, he said. Yes, she said, with the smile that deployed specifically rather than generally, the real one, which he had only seen approximately 4 times and which did something to the something young in him that he was going to need several more years to have the vocabulary to describe accurately. Right, he said, and turned back to the street. Hermione, beside Fleur, was looking at the middle distance with an expression of someone doing very fast arithmetic and arriving at an answer they're choosing not to comment on. They walked away from the ministry together, Harry and Maeve and Ragnarok and Hermione and Fleur and Ash, through December streets, the cold air carrying the particular quality of a city in the last weeks before its annual brief pause, when things close and people go home and the year turns over into something new. Harry had started this in September standing in a Surrey field with a ley line and a 10-year-old boy bleeding dark magic into the earth. He had started it with 28 things in him that weren't his, a name he hadn't chosen, a story told about him that had no room for the person inside it, a cupboard under the stairs and a scar and a whole architecture of control built so carefully around him that he had grown up inside it without seeing the walls. The walls were down. He was still 10 years old. He would be 11 in July and at Hogwarts in September with 5 Wisengamot seats and an active Pacter lineage and a Goblin Bank chief and a Veela queen and an 11-year-old girl who thought in statutes and a 15-year-old French girl who would make an excellent sparring partner for the next several decades, and somewhere in St. Mungo's a man who should have been raising him was waking up into a world that owed him everything it had taken, and in the school's third-floor corridor a stone was being packed in a Gringotts transport case by a goblin team Ragnarok had sent at dawn, and in a cold cell somewhere in the North Atlantic a door was opening. He felt the ley line under the city street, faint but there, running south toward Hampshire and the New Forest and the court in the old trees, and it was clean all the way down, clean and old and full of the particular patience of things that have been here long before anyone living and will be here long after, and it sang its harmonic into the stone and the earth and up through his feet and he let it, the way he'd let the moss grow in the unbinding room, because it was his and it always had been, and there was nothing left to filter it through, no bindings and no blocks and no carefully constructed architecture of limitation standing between him and the full clear fact of what he was. He was Harry. That was all. That was everything. The cold December street carried the smell of chestnuts and stone and the first faint edge of snow from somewhere to the north, and he walked through it with his people around him and his name on the document at Gringotts and his parents' will in the correct file and the ley line underfoot, and the year wound toward its close, and somewhere new was beginning.